Victoria. Elena's voice did not shake. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. The scissors clattered to the marble floor. Every guest in the Valenti ballroom went completely silent. Victoria De Luca laughed the kind of laugh that has never once been told no. She had no idea that the pregnant maid standing before her with freshly cut hair and steady hands pressed against her swollen stomach was carrying a secret that would destroy everything Victoria had spent years building. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow until the very end. Drop a comment and tell us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The celebration had been going on for 3 hours before Victoria De Luca decided she needed to ruin something. That was how she had always been, not content with simply having everything, but needing to take something from someone who had nothing. It was a particular kind of cruelty that only certain people are born into, the kind that comes from never once being told that the world does not exist solely for their pleasure. The Valenti estate was full of people that night. Chicago's most powerful families had gathered to mark the 6th anniversary of the Valenti organization's control over the city's northern territories. There were politicians with their wives and their practiced smiles. There were business associates who had built entire careers on Adrian Valenti's favor. There were men in expensive suits who understood exactly what it meant to be invited into this house and what it meant to never be invited back. Elena Moretti had been moving through all of them for 4 hours without a single person acknowledging that she existed. That was the way it was supposed to be. She carried a silver tray with both hands, moving carefully, precisely, always aware of the extra weight she carried in her body, always keeping one hand close to her stomach when the crowd pressed too near. 7 months. The baby moved frequently. Now small, insistent kicks that reminded her every few minutes why she was here, why she had taken this job, why she woke up every morning and walked back into this house, even though every step inside it felt like walking deeper into something she might not survive. Marco had died 11 months ago. The official report said it was an accident, a car malfunction on the highway outside the city. Speed, a curve in the road, mechanical failure. The kind of death that sounds neat and explainable to anyone who does not know what the person who died was doing in the weeks before they died. Elena knew what Marco had been doing. She had found the notebooks 3 weeks after the funeral, hidden inside the false bottom of a lockbox in their garage. 40 pages of her husband's handwriting. Careful, methodical, the handwriting of a man who knew he was documenting something dangerous and wanted to make sure he got every detail right. Names, dates, transactions. A pattern of corruption that stretched deep inside Chicago's criminal world, tied to a family that Marco had been investigating quietly, carefully, for almost a year before someone decided he had gotten close enough to become a problem. The Valenti name appeared on the first page. The De Luca name appeared on the third. And buried in the middle of those 40 pages, in a passage Marco had underlined twice and marked with a star, was a single sentence that Elena had read so many times she could recite it in her sleep. The child would change everything. She had not understood it at first. She had been 7 weeks pregnant when Marco died, still in the stage where the pregnancy felt more like a possibility than a reality, and grief had taken up so much space inside her that understanding anything beyond the basics of surviving each day had felt impossible. But she had kept reading. She had kept going back to those notebooks. And slowly, across weeks of reading and cross-referencing, and sitting at her kitchen table late at night, piecing together what her husband had been trying to expose, Elena had begun to understand. Marco had not simply been investigating corruption. He had been following a bloodline, and somehow, in the middle of all of it, he had discovered something about their unborn child that had changed the entire direction of what he was doing. She had taken the job in the Valenti household 4 months ago. She had presented herself at the service entrance with forged references and a quiet manner, and the kind of face that powerful people look through rather than at. She had been hired within 20 minutes. Nobody had looked at her twice. That was what she needed. She needed to be invisible until she found what she was looking for. Tonight was the closest she had come. "You're in my way." Elena stopped moving. She turned carefully, holding the tray level. Victoria De Luca was standing 6 feet away, dressed in a gown that probably cost more than Elena had earned in the past 2 years, with her dark hair swept up and her eyes fixed on Elena with an expression that made the back of Elena's neck go cold. Victoria was 28 years old and had been engaged to Adrian Valenti for 8 months. She was the daughter of Dominic De Luca, whose family controlled the southern territories and 3 major ports, and she had grown up understanding that her family's power came from the ability to make problems disappear quietly and efficiently. She was also, Elena had observed, over 4 months of careful watching, genuinely frightened of something in this house. Not of Adrian, of something she thought he might find out. "I'm sorry," Elena said, stepping to the side. "I'll move." "I see you looking at him." Victoria's voice was low and even, not angry yet, testing. Elena did not let herself react. "I wasn't looking at anyone. I was serving the guests." "You were looking at Adrian." Victoria took 1 step forward. "I've noticed you watching him for weeks. Don't think I haven't." This was the moment Elena had trained herself for. Every instinct she had wanted to answer, wanted to defend herself, wanted to say something that would make this woman understand that Adrian Valenti was the furthest thing from what Elena was here for. But saying anything real would risk everything. She had gotten close, so close to finding the evidence she needed. Marco's notebooks pointed to a specific set of financial records that had to exist somewhere inside this estate. She had narrowed the location down to either Adrian's private study or the archive room on the 3rd floor. She needed 3 more days, maybe 4. She could not risk anything tonight. "I apologize if I gave that impression," Elena said, keeping her voice soft and her eyes down. "It won't happen again." She turned to move away. She heard Victoria call out behind her, heard the words delivered not to Elena, but to the entire room, loud enough to carry over the conversation, the music, the clinking of glasses. "Does everyone see this? The help thinks she belongs at the same party as the guests." The room did not go quiet immediately. These were people who understood power, and most of them had learned that reacting too quickly to any situation inside the Valenti household was a way to end up on the wrong side of something you couldn't come back from. The music continued. The conversations continued. But people stopped fully engaging with each other and began paying a different kind of attention. Elena did not turn around. "Honey." Victoria's voice was closer now. "I'm talking to you." "I heard you," Elena said quietly. "I'll get out of your way." "I don't think you understand how things work here." Victoria moved until she was directly in front of Elena, forcing her to stop or physically walk into her. "You don't look at my fiancé. You don't stand near him. You don't make eye contact with anyone who matters in this room. You are here to carry that tray and disappear. Is that clear?" Elena looked at her. Just for a moment. Just long enough to let Victoria see that she was not afraid, which was the wrong thing to do. Victoria's expression shifted. "Your hair," she said slowly, as if she had just noticed it. "It's all over your shoulders. That's not appropriate for someone in your position." Elena had always taken care of her hair. It was a small, foolish vanity, she knew that, but it was one of the few things she had maintained throughout everything. Through the grief, through the fear, through 4 months of living half a life inside a house that had destroyed her husband, she had kept her hair. Long and dark and well kept, because her mother had always said that there was dignity in taking care of yourself, even when the world treated you as if you had none. She saw the scissors in Victoria's hand before she understood what was happening. Not a large pair, small silver, the kind kept on side tables for cutting ribbon at events like this. Victoria had simply picked them up from the nearest surface without pausing in her performance, without any hesitation, as if the thought and the action were one single thing. "Don't!" Elena's voice came out sharper than she intended. She took a step back. "Don't you dare!" Victoria moved faster than Elena expected. The sound of the blades cutting through hair is a particular kind of sound. It is not loud, but it is very specific, and once you have heard it in a situation like this one, you do not forget it. A section of Elena's hair fell forward onto the floor. The room went quiet in stages. The music stopped because someone near the sound system reached out instinctively. The conversation stopped because the conversations had already slowed to the point where stopping was the natural next move. And then there was just silence, and the scissors still open in Victoria DeLuca's hand, and Elena standing very still with one hand pressed flat against her stomach. Not trembling. Her hand was not trembling. Victoria looked at the hair on the floor. Then she looked at the people watching her. And then she did the thing that Elena would never be able to fully explain to anyone who had not witnessed it. Victoria smiled. Not a vicious smile, not a cruel smile, but the genuinely pleased smile of someone who had done exactly what they intended to do and found it entirely satisfying. "Much better," Victoria said. Nobody in the room said anything. Elena looked at the hair on the floor. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked up, and she found Adrian Valenti standing at the far end of the room, and his eyes were already on her. He had seen all of it. She did not know how long he had been standing there, or when he had come in, or how much he had heard. What she knew was that he was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on his face in 4 months of careful observation. Not anger exactly, but something beneath anger, something older and more controlled and far more dangerous than simple anger. And she knew in that moment that everything was about to change. Adrian Valenti was 34 years old and had been running the most powerful criminal organization in Chicago since he was 26, when his father had died under circumstances that the official record described as natural causes, and that everyone inside the organization understood to mean something else entirely. He had built his reputation on 2 things: absolute loyalty to people who deserved it, and absolute absence of mercy for people who betrayed it. He was not a violent man by preference. He was a precise man, a patient man, a man who understood that most problems solve themselves if you give them enough space and enough time and enough of the right kind of pressure. But he was also a man who had learned very early that some situations require an immediate response, and that hesitating in those moments is the most expensive mistake a person can make. He crossed the room. Not quickly, not running, not storming, not the dramatic entrance that the situation seemed to call for. He moved at his normal pace, the pace of a man who has never once had to rush, because every room he walks into understands immediately that nothing happens until he decides it does. The crowd parted without being asked. That was what happened when Adrian Valenti moved through a space. Victoria saw him coming. He watched her expression cycle through several things in rapid succession: surprise, then adjustment, then the very specific performance of someone who has done something they know might need defending and has already decided on their defense before the confrontation begins. "Adrian," she said warmly, "I was just... don't." He didn't look at her. He was looking at Elena. This was the first time he had looked at Elena, truly looked at her in 4 months. He had been aware of her in the way that he was aware of everyone in his household, peripherally, as a function of a system that he monitored rather than engaged with directly. He had noticed in the abstract way that he noticed most things that the new maid was quiet and careful and never put herself in a position to be observed. He had not thought about it beyond that. He was thinking about it now, because standing in front of him with a section of her dark hair missing and one hand pressed flat against the curve of her stomach and her eyes meeting his with a directness that nobody inside this room had ever used with him, was a woman who did not look like any maid he had ever seen. She looked like someone who was waiting for something. "Are you all right?" he asked. It was such a simple question, the simplest question. And Elena's expression for just a fraction of a second showed something that she immediately controlled. A flicker of surprise, maybe, or something more complicated than surprise. The expression of someone who had not been asked that question in a very long time and was not quite sure what to do with being asked it now. "I'm fine," she said. "You're not fine." He turned to look at Victoria then, and whatever expression was on his face made Victoria take a small, involuntary step backward. "What did you do?" "It was a joke, Adrian. She was standing where she shouldn't have been, and I simply..." "You took scissors to a pregnant woman." The room stayed absolutely silent. Victoria's jaw tightened. "She was looking at you all evening. I won't pretend I didn't notice, and I won't stand in my own house and be made to feel, this is not your house. His voice was very quiet. This house belongs to me. These people are my guests. Every person in this room tonight, including her, is here under my protection. Do you understand what that means? Victoria looked at him. Adrian, do you understand what that means? The silence that followed was the kind of silence that changes things. Victoria understood because she was not a stupid woman that she had miscalculated. She had read the room wrong, had read Adrian wrong, had believed that this was a situation she could perform her way through and come out of without consequence. She was beginning to realize that she had been wrong about all of it. I understand, she said stiffly. Good. He turned back to Elena. Come with me. He took her to his private study off the main hall, not back to the servants' quarters, not to a side room, to his own study, which was the kind of statement that would be discussed and analyzed by everyone in that ballroom for the next 2 weeks. Elena sat in the chair across from his desk and watched him pour a glass of water and set it in front of her without asking if she wanted it. Then he sat down across from her and looked at her for a long moment without saying anything. She was acutely aware, sitting in this room, that she was in the most dangerous position she had been in since she entered this house. Not because Adrian Valenti was threatening her, but because he was paying attention to her. And a man this precise paying attention to a person who had been hiding something for 4 months was a very particular kind of danger. How long have you been working here? He asked. 4 months, she said. I was hired through the agency. I know how you were hired. He leaned back in his chair. That's not what I asked. She looked at him carefully. 4 months, she repeated. And before that, I worked as a household manager for a family in the suburbs, before my husband died. His expression didn't change. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. What was your husband's name? The question landed differently than she expected. Not casual, not conversational, precise. The question of a man who was already thinking something specific and asking in order to confirm or deny it. Marco, she said. And then, because lying about his surname felt like a different kind of betrayal than any of the other lies she was telling in this room, she said, Marco Moretti. Something happened on Adrian Valenti's face. It was small and fast, and she almost missed it. But she was trained to notice things like this, had spent 4 months training herself to watch the people in this house and catalog every reaction, every shift, every moment when someone's carefully maintained composure showed a crack beneath it. He had heard that name before. He recognized it. She didn't let herself react to that. She held his gaze and kept her hands loose in her lap and breathed. How did he die? Adrian asked. Car accident, outside the city, about 11 months ago. I see. He was quiet for a moment. And you found employment here because I needed work, and someone told me the Valenti household was hiring. I needed somewhere that would accommodate. She gestured briefly at her stomach. Most places won't. He nodded slowly. Then he said, You should know that what happened tonight will not happen again. I appreciate you saying that. I'm not saying it to be kind. His voice was still quiet, even still the voice of a man who never uses more words than a situation requires. I'm saying it because there are rules in my household, and Victoria violated one of them. A guest in this house, regardless of their position, is under my protection. That applies to everyone. Elena looked at him. She didn't treat me like a guest. No, he agreed. She didn't. A pause. But I am. She didn't know what to do with that. She had prepared for many scenarios. In the 4 months she had been here, had walked through dozens of hypothetical conversations and confrontations and moments of potential discovery. She had not prepared for Adrian Valenti, looking at her across his desk and speaking to her as though she was a person whose dignity actually mattered to him. It was, she realized, the most disarming thing that had happened to her in 11 months. She stood up carefully. I should get back to work. You should rest. He said it the same way he said everything, not a suggestion, not a request. A statement of what should happen. The kitchens won't miss you for the rest of the evening. I'll have someone take you upstairs. She wanted to say no. Every instinct she had said that accepting anything from this man was a risk she couldn't afford. That proximity to Adrian Valenti was exactly the thing she needed to avoid if she was going to stay in this house long enough to find what she came for. But her back ached. The baby was pressing against her ribs in a way that had been making it hard to breathe for the last hour. And there was something about the way Adrian was watching her that made her feel for the first time in longer than she could measure that someone in this building knew she existed. "All right," she said. She walked to the door. "Elena." His voice stopped her. She turned. "Your husband's name," he said. "Marco Moretti. I want you to know I'm going to look into what happened to him." The air in the room changed. She looked at him for a long moment. "Why?" "Because the name is familiar to me," he said. "And because familiar things in my experience don't become familiar by accident." She nodded once. Then she walked out of the room and the door closed behind her, and she stood in the hallway and pressed her back against the wall and waited for her hands to stop shaking. They took 3 full minutes. Victoria found her before she reached the stairs. She had not expected that. She had assumed Victoria would spend the rest of the evening performing composure for the guests, managing the damage of whatever Adrian's response had done to her standing in the room, doing the things that women like Victoria De Luca do when they are embarrassed in public. Instead, Victoria was waiting for her in the back corridor with no one else around, and her expression had changed entirely from what it had been in the ballroom. The performance was gone. What was underneath it was not anger exactly, but something colder and more considered. "You made a mistake tonight," Victoria said. Elena stopped. "I think there was only one mistake made tonight. Adrian will forget about this by morning." Victoria's voice was low, steady, measured. "He has a habit of caring about things for exactly as long as it takes for something more important to come along. By tomorrow, you'll be invisible again, and I'll still be here, and I'm going to make sure you understand that clearly." "I understand you perfectly," Elena said. "I don't think you do." Victoria stepped closer. "I know why women like you come into houses like this. I've seen it before. You think proximity to power is the same as protection? It isn't. Power protects the people who belong to it, and you don't belong anywhere in this world." Elena looked at her. "Why did you really cut my hair?" Victoria blinked. It was a fast, small reaction, barely a movement at all, but Elena caught it. "Because you were in my way. That's not why." Elena's voice was very calm. "You've seen dozens of maids in this house, and none of them bothered you enough to put scissors to their hair. What is it about me specifically?" Something shifted in Victoria's face. It was gone, immediately smoothed back over with the practiced composure of someone who has spent their life hiding things behind other things. But Elena had seen it. Fear. Not of Elena, of what Elena might know. "Get some rest," Victoria said finally. Her voice had returned to its normal register-controlled dismissive, the voice of someone who has decided the conversation is over. "And think carefully about how much longer you want to stay in this house." She walked away. Elena stood in the corridor alone and thought about what she had seen in Victoria's face. Then she thought about what Adrian had said. The name is familiar to me, and what it meant that the man who ran this organization had recognized Marco's name on the first hearing. She pressed her palm flat against the swell of her stomach and felt the baby move beneath her hand. "I know," she whispered. "I know. We're getting close." She did not sleep that night. She lay in the narrow bed in her room on the second floor of the servants' wing and stared at the ceiling and went back through everything she knew. Every piece of information Marco had left her. Every observation she had made in 4 months inside this house. The financial records Marco had referenced in his notebooks were specific, a set of transaction logs from a particular 6-month period, records of money moving between the Valenti organization, and a set of shell companies that Marco had traced back to Dominic De Luca. The kind of transactions that would prove deliberate and coordinated corruption. The kind of evidence that could not be explained away as coincidence or business as usual. Marco had believed those records were stored somewhere inside the Valenti estate. Either in Adrian's private study or in the archive room on the third floor, which was kept locked and which Elena had not yet found a way to access. She had been 3 days away from finding a way into that room. Tonight had changed the timeline. Adrian was now paying attention to her. He would start asking questions. He had already recognized Marco's name, which meant he had already started some version of an investigation in his own mind. And a man like Adrian Valenti. Once he started an investigation, did not stop until he had the answer. That could either help her or destroy everything she had built. She did not know yet which it would be. What she knew was that she had maybe 48 hours before Adrian Valenti started pulling on the same threads she had been pulling on, and that when he did, one of two things would happen. Either he would find the records and realize they pointed to the De Lucas, in which case his interests and her interests aligned perfectly, or he would find something else, something Marco had buried in those notebooks that she had not fully understood yet, and everything would become far more complicated. She rolled onto her side and pulled the blanket around her shoulders. The baby kicked. She put her hand over her stomach and lay there in the dark and thought about Marco. About the way he used to sit at the kitchen table in the evening and do the crossword puzzle in the newspaper with a mechanical pencil, always in pencil, because he said his first guesses were usually wrong. About the way he used to laugh full and sudden, like something that surprised him. About the 40 pages of handwriting she had memorized so thoroughly that she could close her eyes and see his words on the backs of her eyelids. The child would change everything. She had not understood that sentence for months. She understood it now. And the understanding terrified her more than anything Victoria De Luca could do with a pair of scissors. Douse. The next morning the house felt different. Elena could not have named the specific way it was different, but she had spent 4 months learning the rhythms of this place. The way you learn the rhythms of any environment where survival depends on reading things correctly, and the rhythm of the morning after the party was off. 3 of the senior household staff were huddled in the kitchen corridor when she came down. They went quiet when they saw her. Not the kind of quiet that meant they had been talking about something embarrassing, the kind of quiet that meant they had been talking about something they didn't want her to hear. She got her breakfast and went about her morning duties and paid careful, measured attention to everything. By 10 o'clock, she had gathered enough. Adrian had dismissed 2 of his personal security staff that morning. Not fired them, dismissed them, which in the language of this household meant something more specific. They had been moved to inactive status, which was what happened when Adrian needed to investigate someone without making a formal accusation. The 2 men who had been dismissed were both assigned to the De Luca family's security detail. He was already moving. She was carrying a stack of freshly pressed linens to the 3rd floor when she rounded the corner and nearly walked directly into Nico Ferraro. Nico was Adrian's right hand. 31 quiet in the same way Adrian was quiet, but with a sharper edge to it, the kind of man who noticed everything and said nothing until he had calculated exactly what saying it would cost. He had never spoken directly to Elena in 4 months. He was speaking to her now. "Mr. Valenti would like to see you," he said. "When?" she asked. "Now." She set the linens down on the nearest surface and followed him. Adrian was in his study again, standing behind his desk this time, rather than sitting. He had a file open in front of him, and he did not look up when she entered, and she had the specific feeling of being in the room with someone who has found something that has changed the shape of what they thought they knew. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. "Sit down." She sat. He finally looked up. He looked at her for a long moment, the same examining look he had given her the night before, but more focused now, more specific, like a man who has narrowed a large question down to a small one and is looking at the person in front of him to get the answer. "I had someone look into your husband's accident last night," he said. She kept her expression neutral. "And it wasn't an accident." The words sat in the room between them. Elena did not say anything. She had known this for 11 months. She had known it from the first week after the funeral, when the details of the investigation had not added up, and the mechanic who inspected the car had given her a look when he reported his findings that told her he was being careful about what he said and why. She had known it and lived with it and built an entire parallel existence around it, and hearing it stated plainly, by another person, by this person in this room, created a feeling she had not expected. Not relief, not validation. Something rawer than that. Something that sat in her chest and pressed against the back of her eyes and made her have to work very hard to keep her face still. "What do you know?" she asked. "I know the accident was staged," he said. "The brake line failure was not mechanical. Someone accessed that car in the 48 hours before Marco was driving it." He looked at the file. "I also know that Marco had been looking into things he was not supposed to be looking into. And I know that whoever had him killed was trying to prevent specific information from reaching specific people." "What information?" He looked at her. "You already know, don't you?" It was not a question. She held his gaze. "What makes you think that—" "Because you're here." His voice was very even. "Because you took a job as a maid in my household 4 months after your husband died. Because you are 7 months pregnant and still working, which means you need the income badly enough to keep going, or—" He paused. "Or you're not here for income at all." Silence. "Elena," he said, "I want to help you, but I can't do that if you won't tell me the truth." She looked at him for a long time. She thought about 40 pages of Marco's handwriting. She thought about a sentence underlined twice. She thought about everything she had risked and everything she still needed, and the fact that this man right now was the single most dangerous person she could tell the truth to, and possibly the only person in a position to do something with it. She made the decision the way she had made most decisions in the past 11 months, not from certainty, but from the understanding that some moments don't allow for waiting. "My husband was investigating corruption inside the Mafia world," she said. "He found evidence connecting financial crimes to a specific family. He documented everything: transactions, names, dates. He was killed before he could expose it." Adrian didn't move. "I came here because the evidence he found pointed to this house," she continued. "I wasn't sure whether you were involved or whether someone inside your organization was operating without your knowledge. I came here to find the records Marco said existed and to understand who is actually responsible." The room was very quiet. "Who did he identify?" Adrian asked. His voice had changed slightly. Still controlled, still even, but with a quality underneath it that she could not quite read. "The DeLucas," she said. Adrian looked at her. He looked at her for a long time, and then he said very quietly, "Tell me everything." She did. Not all of it. Not the part about the child. Not the sentence that Marco had underlined twice. Not the thing that she still did not fully understand herself. But everything else, every detail she had pieced together from the notebooks, every observation she had made in 4 months inside his house, every connection she had traced between the transactions Marco had documented and the shell companies that led back to Dominic DeLuca. Adrian listened without interrupting. He asked 3 questions, each one precise and specific, each one landing in a gap in her account where she had left something out because she wasn't sure whether it was relevant. He was, she realized, exactly as good at this as she had been afraid he would be. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The records Marco mentioned," he said. "The transaction logs. I know what he was referring to." She looked at him. "You do?" "Yes." He looked at the file in front of him. "Because someone brought them to my attention 18 months ago, and I was told at the time that they had been dealt with, that the irregularities had been investigated and resolved." He paused. "I'm beginning to think I was lied to." "By who?" she asked. He looked up at her. His expression was the expression of a man who has just understood something large and complicated, and whose understanding of it has cost him something real. "By the person I trusted most to tell me the truth," he said. He did not say her name. He didn't need to. Elena watched his face and thought about Marco sitting at their kitchen table in the evening, doing the crossword in pencil, because his first guesses were usually wrong. She thought about how sometimes the most important truths are the ones that were right in front of you all along, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to make themselves impossible to ignore. She pressed her hand against her stomach. The baby was still. Outside the study window, the city of Chicago moved on in its ordinary way, indifferent to the fact that inside this house, inside this room, the shape of something very large was beginning slowly and inevitably to change. Adrian closed the file. He did not slam it, did not throw it, did not do any of the things that a lesser man might do when the ground shifts beneath him. He simply closed it, set it flat on the desk, and sat with what he had just heard in the way that men who have survived as long as he has learn to sit with things that hurt. Very still, very quiet, letting the reality of it settle before deciding what to do next. Elena watched him and said nothing. "How much of this does Victoria know?" he asked finally. "I think she knows enough to be afraid," Elena said. "The way she looked at me last night, that wasn't jealousy. That was someone who recognized a threat they hadn't anticipated." "Meaning she knows who you are?" "Not who I am, what I might know." Elena paused. "There's a difference." Adrian looked at her. "How long have you been doing this alone?" 11 months. He was quiet for a moment. "You came into my house pregnant and grieving and carrying evidence against people who already killed your husband, and you did it alone." It was not admiration in his voice. It was something closer to the particular recognition one careful person gives to another. Careful person, the acknowledgement that they have been underestimated by the same world and survived it the same way. "I didn't have another option," Elena said simply. "You could have gone to the police." Marco tried to go to the police. She looked at him steadily. He made one phone call to a federal contact 3 weeks before he died. The accident happened 12 days later. The silence that followed was the kind that answers its own question. Adrian stood up and walked to the window. He stood with his back to her for a moment, and she could see in the set of his shoulders the specific kind of weight that comes from understanding that the problem in front of you is larger than you initially calculated. "Nico," he said. The door opened immediately. Nico had been just outside, which meant he had been listening, which meant Adrian had expected this conversation to go somewhere significant and had positioned his most trusted person accordingly. "I need the archive room opened," Adrian said, "and I need to know who has accessed it in the last 18 months. Nico glanced at Elena. Once fast, the practiced look of a man taking inventory. Then back to Adrian. "All of it. Every entry log, every file removed, replaced, reviewed. Everything." A pause. "And I need it done quietly." "Understood." Nico left. Adrian turned back to Elena. "The records Marco documented, if they exist in this house, they're in that room. Nobody accesses the archive without my authorization, which means if someone removed or altered anything, there will be a record of the breach, even if the original documents are gone. And if the records are still intact, then we have everything we need." He looked at her. "But I need you to understand something. If what you're telling me is true, if the DeLucas orchestrated your husband's death and used my organization to do it, then the moment I move on this, it becomes a war, not a legal matter, not something I can hand to a prosecutor and walk away from. A war." "I know. And your child." "I know," she said again. Her voice did not waver. "I've known what I was walking into since the day I walked in. I'm not asking you to protect me, Mr. Valenti. I'm asking you to help me find the truth." He studied her for a moment. "Adrian," he said. She looked at him. "My name is Adrian." He said it without softness, without warmth. Just the plain correction of a man who has decided that the distance between them is no longer the appropriate distance. "If we're going to do this together, call me Adrian." She held his gaze. "All right." The air between them shifted in a way that neither of them acknowledged out loud, but both of them felt the specific shift that happens when two people who have been holding each other at arm's length decide simultaneously to stop. She stood. I should get back before anyone notices I've been here too long. Go through the east corridor, he said. Less foot traffic. A beat. And Elena, don't let Victoria know anything has changed. As far as she's concerned, last night happened and was forgotten. I understand. Can you do that? She almost smiled. I've been doing it for 4 months. She left. Victoria DeLuca had a habit of making phone calls in the sunroom off the East Garden at exactly 11 o'clock in the morning. Elena had catalogued this fact in the second week of her employment, along with 17 other patterns and habits of the household's key figures, all noted not in writing, but in the precise and organized memory of a woman who had spent the last year training herself to notice the things that careful people try to hide. She did not go near the sunroom that morning, but she walked past it once slowly with a stack of towels that needed to go nowhere urgently, and she caught 3 words through the half-open door before she moved on. 3 words spoken in the low and carefully controlled voice of someone who believes they are not being overheard. She already knows. Elena kept walking. She did not change her pace. She did not let her body show the thing that happened inside her chest when she heard those words. The cold rush of adrenaline that meant the timeline had just compressed again, that 48 hours had just become something shorter. She turned the corner and stood for a moment with her back against the wall. She already knows. Which meant Victoria was talking to someone. Which meant that someone would need to act on that information. Which meant that the quiet, careful investigation she and Adrian had just agreed to conduct might not have as much time as either of them had hoped. She needed to get to the archive room before the DeLucas did. She found Nico in the east corridor 40 minutes later. He was walking back toward the main house from the direction of the archive room, and he had a look on his face that she had not seen before. Not concern exactly, but the look of a man who has found something that has changed the shape of what he expected to find. Is it open? She asked. He looked at her. She could see him making a calculation Adrian had brought her into this, which meant she was inside the boundary of what he was allowed to tell her. But Nico Ferraro had not spent 10 years as Adrian Valenti's right hand by telling people things before he confirmed they needed to know. Walk with me, he said. They walked back toward the main house. He kept his voice low. The access log has a gap, he said. 7 weeks ago, a 3-hour window during which the room was accessed, but the entry was recorded as a routine maintenance check. The sign-off signature belongs to a staff member who was out of the country that week. Elena absorbed that. So someone covered it. Someone very careful. He glanced at her sideways, but not careful enough to account for the secondary system. We installed a digital log 18 months ago as a backup. It doesn't get tampered with because most people don't know it exists. Who does know it exists? Adrian, me, the tech contractor who installed it. A beat. And the person who accessed the archive 7 weeks ago, which means either they knew about it and decided to risk it anyway, or they didn't know about it at all. What does the digital log show? Nico stopped walking. He turned to face her fully, which was the first time he had done that, and she understood that what he was about to say was something significant enough that he wanted to be looking at her face when he said it. The person who accessed the archive 7 weeks ago, he said, used Victoria DeLuca's access credentials. Elena looked at him. Victoria's credentials, she repeated. Her personal code. The one she was given when Adrian registered her as a household member after the engagement. He paused. But here's the thing. The system also logs the device the code was entered from. The device used that night was not any device Victoria owns. It was a phone registered to Dominic DeLuca. The information arranged itself in Elena's mind in the space of about 3 seconds, assembling into a picture that was cleaner and more specific than she had expected. Victoria's own father had accessed the archive using her credentials, which meant either Victoria had given him the code deliberately or he had taken it without her knowledge. And given what Elena had seen in Victoria's face in the corridor the night before, That specific flicker of fear, that was not the fear of exposure, but the deeper, more complicated fear of someone who is not entirely sure what the person they are protecting might have done. She was not entirely certain which one was true. "Does Adrian know yet?" she asked. "I'm telling him in 10 minutes, Nico said. "I wanted to tell you first." That surprised her. She looked at him. "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because Marco Moretti came to me 14 months ago, before he died." He held her gaze. "He told me what he was investigating. He told me he had evidence of something that went deeper than he initially believed. He asked me whether I could help him get it to Adrian without going through the normal channels." A pause. "I told him to give me 2 weeks to figure out the right approach. He was dead in 12 days. Elena's chest tightened. "You've known." "I've suspected. There's a difference." His voice was even, but underneath. The evenness was something that had been carried for a long time. "I didn't have proof. I had a conversation with a man who died shortly after, and a lot of things that added up to something I couldn't confirm. Adrian had already been told the issue was resolved. I had no way to contradict that without either proof or someone willing to come forward." He looked at her steadily. "You're the proof, Elena. You're what I've been waiting for." She stood there in the corridor and felt the particular vertigo of realizing that the thing you thought you were doing alone was never entirely alone, that there had been someone else carrying their own piece of it, waiting for the missing piece to arrive. "Why didn't you go looking for me?" she asked. "I didn't know you existed until you walked in the door 4 months ago." A very slight pause. "When you did, I recognized the name. I've been watching you work ever since. And you didn't stop me." "No. You could have." "Yes." He looked at her without apology. "But you were doing exactly what needed to be done, and I wasn't going to get in the way of that." She thought about Marco sitting at the kitchen table with his crossword puzzle. She thought about him deciding to trust this man with 14 months of investigation and then being dead 12 days later, and what that must have cost Nico Ferraro in the time since. "He was right to trust you," she said. Nico looked away for a moment. When he looked back, his expression was contained again. "Come with me to tell Adrian." Adrian's reaction to what Nico told him was the most controlled expression of fury Elena had ever witnessed in a person. He did not raise his voice. He did not move from behind his desk. He listened to Nico walk through the access log, the credentials, the device, trace all of it, and his face went through absolutely nothing visible while he processed it. And then he was quiet for exactly 30 seconds. Elena counted before he said, "Where's Victoria right now?" "Sunroom," Nico said. "And her father?" "Still in the city. He stayed in town after last night's event." "Of course he did." Adrian's voice was very quiet. He wanted to make sure the problem was managed. "The problem being Elena," Nico said. "The problem being what Elena might know." Adrian looked at her. "Which means you need to not be visible today. Can you manage that?" "I can manage it," she said. "But Adrian, if Dominic DeLuca knows I'm here and knows what I might have, he's not going to wait long before he moves. Last night's event was too public. Victoria cut my hair in front of 50 witnesses, and now you've already pulled me into your study twice. Whatever he's planning, he'll accelerate it. I know." He turned to Nico. "I need the DeLuca financial records pulled from the archive before anything else happens to them. And I need someone I trust personally, not anyone on payroll who came through the DeLuca referral chain, someone completely outside that network." "I have someone," Nico said. "Then do it in the next 3 hours. A beat. And tell him if those records have been altered or removed. I want to know which specific files are missing. The shape of the absence tells us as much as the presence would." Nico left again. Adrian looked at Elena. "You said Marco's notebooks are somewhere safe." "They're not in this house," she said. "I wouldn't have brought them here." "Good. I need you to get me specific document references. The file identifiers Marco noted, the account numbers, anything that would let us cross-reference what's in the archive against what he recorded." He paused. How quickly can you get that? I have the relevant sections memorized. He looked at her. I've read them a lot, she said. Something happened on his face that was very close to being something warm before he brought it back under control. He pulled a legal pad across the desk and set a pen beside it. Write down everything you can recall. Every number, every name, every reference. I need it before Nico's person goes into that room. She sat down and picked up the pen. She wrote for 22 minutes without stopping. When she set the pen down, the legal pad had 4 pages of dense specific information, account numbers, transaction dates, shell company names, the names of 3 men Marco had identified as intermediaries, and the 2 specific file references he had noted in his notebooks as the key documents. Adrian picked it up and read it. Then he read it again. This is exactly what we need, he said. Marco was very thorough. He was. He set the pad down. He was also right about something else. Something I didn't fully understand until I started pulling the thread last night. He looked at her. Elena, how much did Marco tell you about his own history before you were married, before he started investigating? What did you know about where he came from? She frowned slightly. He grew up in the Bridgeport area. His family was Italian-American working class. He never talked much about extended family. His parents both died when he was young, and he said there wasn't much family left. Did he ever mention the Valenti name in that context? In a personal context, not a professional one. She went still. Once, she said slowly. Very early in our relationship before we were married. He mentioned that his mother's family had a name he never used, a name that had caused problems for her when she was young. He didn't tell me what it was. He said it didn't matter anymore. She looked at Adrian. Why? Adrian set the legal pad down flat. He looked at his hands for a moment, then he looked at her. Because Marco Moretti's mother was born with a different surname, he said. Before she left Chicago, before she changed her name, before she spent 30 years making sure nobody in this city could connect her to where she came from. Elena felt the room shift. Her name, Adrian said, was Julia Valenti. The silence lasted a long time. She was my father's younger sister, he said. She left the family when I was 3 years old. There was a conflict, a serious one, about the direction my father wanted to take the organization. She disagreed. She took her son, and she left, and she changed their names, and she spent the rest of her life making sure that connection stayed buried. He paused. Marco grew up not knowing. Or knowing and choosing not to know. I'm not sure which. Marco's mother was your aunt, Elena said. Yes, that makes Marco. My cousin. His voice was even. My cousin who spent a year investigating corruption inside this organization without knowing he was investigating his own family. A long pause. And whose child? He stopped. Elena's hand moved to her stomach without her consciously deciding to move it. She understood now. She understood the sentence Marco had underlined twice. She understood why he had marked it with a star. She understood what he had found at the end of his investigation that had changed everything about what he was doing and why he was doing it. The child would change everything. Her child was not just Marco's child. Her child was a Valenti. The last surviving child of a branch of the family that had been deliberately cut off and buried, and in a world where bloodlines and succession and the legitimacy of organizational control all depended on exactly these kinds of connections, her unborn child was not simply a life to be protected. Her child was an heir. He found out, she said. It was not a question. He must have, Adrian said. Sometime in the last weeks of his investigation, he found the connection between his mother's history and the Valenti family, and he understood what it meant for your child, and that's when they killed him. Her voice came out very flat, very even. The voice of someone who has just had a theory they have lived with for 11 months confirmed in the worst possible way. It wasn't just about the financial records. It was about the bloodline. It was about what my baby represents. Adrian was quiet. Dominic DeLuca has been positioning his family to eventually absorb the Valenti organization, Elena said. She was thinking out loud now, putting pieces together in real time. The engagement to Victoria was part of that plan. But if Marco had gone public with the financial corruption evidence, the De Luca plan would have collapsed. And if it came out that there was a living Valenti heir, Victoria's position becomes worthless, Adrian said. Dominic's entire strategy depends on the Valenti line ending with me with no legitimate heirs, making the merger through marriage the natural succession. An heir changes all of that. His voice was measured and very cold. Which is why Marco had to die before he could tell anyone what he found. And why I have to... She stopped. Why you have to be dealt with. Adrian finished. He said it plainly, not to frighten her, but because they were past the point of managing each other's reactions. Yes. They looked at each other across the desk. Elena thought about the scissors on the ballroom floor last night. She thought about Victoria waiting for her in the corridor afterward. Think carefully about how much longer you want to stay in this house. She thought about 3 words heard through a half-open door that morning. She already knows. Victoria told her father this morning, Elena said. She told him she thinks I know something. She used those exact words, she already knows. How do you know what she said? I walked past the sunroom at 11. The door was open slightly. She paused. I think Victoria may not fully understand what she's a part of. The fear I saw in her face last night, it wasn't the fear of someone who planned a murder. It was the fear of someone who suspects they've been used and doesn't know how far it goes. Adrian looked at her carefully. You're defending her. I'm reading her accurately. There's a difference. She met his gaze. It matters, Adrian. If Victoria is a willing participant in her father's plan, your response to this has to be one thing. If she's a pawn who's beginning to understand she's been a pawn, your response has to be something else. He was quiet for a moment. You think like an investigator. I think like a widow who wants to know who actually killed her husband, she said. Victoria made my life miserable for 4 months. But she didn't kill Marco. Her father did. The distinction settled into the room between them. Adrian picked up the legal pad again. I need to move on this today. If Dominic knows you might have information, he won't wait. He'll try to remove me from the house, Elena said. He'll give Victoria a reason to make that happen. Something that looks reasonable from the outside. A complaint about my behavior, a manufactured issue with my work. He might also try something more direct. Yes. She didn't flinch from that. Which is why I need to not be easy to find in the next few hours. I'll have Nico assign someone to your hall. Don't. She shook her head. If Dominic sees increased security around a maid, he'll know we're moving. Keep everything looking normal. Give me a task that takes me somewhere in the house that's not isolated. Somewhere with other staff. He looked at her. Somewhere I can be visible without being vulnerable, she added. The main kitchen, he said. We're organizing the post-event inventory. 12 staff constant movement, and it's 2 rooms from the security station. He paused. You know what you're doing. I know what I need to survive, she said. Those are sometimes the same thing. She stood to go. Elena. His voice stopped her at the door the second time in less than 24 hours, and she wondered if he realized that if he noticed that she had become the person he called back. The notebooks Marco left, the 40 pages. She turned. Did he write about the child specifically? Adrian asked. Did he write what he thought it meant for the baby? She thought about the sentence. She thought about the star beside it. He wrote that the child would change everything, she said. He didn't write what he meant by that. I think he was still working it out when he died. Adrian nodded once. His expression was difficult to read, not blank, but layered, the expression of a man processing something that has reached far past the professional and into something he has not let himself think about directly. She left. The kitchen was exactly what Adrian had described, busy, loud, organized chaos. The kind of environment where a person could move and think and keep their eyes open without standing out. Elena worked steadily, moving through the inventory task with the same quiet efficiency she had brought to every assignment in 4 months. And she watched the room and listened to the patterns around her and waited. At 1:30, one of the younger kitchen staff girls came in from the delivery entrance looking slightly pale. She went directly to the senior kitchen manager, a solid woman named Rosa, who had run this kitchen for 12 years, and whispered something. Rosa's face went carefully neutral in the way that faces go when information arrives that requires processing before reacting. 20 minutes later, Rosa found Elena sorting linen napkins near the storage room. "There's a car outside," Rosa said very quietly. "A car that wasn't here this morning. It's been there since about noon. Black, no plates visible from the kitchen window." Elena kept her hands moving over the napkins. "Who else has noticed?" "Couple of the delivery staff. They didn't think much of it." Rosa paused. "I thought much of it." Elena looked at her. "Rosa, I've worked in this house 12 years, Rosa said. "I know what a car that shouldn't be here looks like." She lowered her voice further. "And I know what happened to the last person in this house who saw something they weren't supposed to see." "What happened to them?" "They left," Rosa said simply. "Voluntarily, officially. But they left very fast, and they never came back, and they don't answer their phone anymore." She looked at Elena steadily. "You should tell Mr. Valenti about the car." "I will," Elena said. "Tell him now," Rosa said. "Not later." Elena set down the napkins and walked out of the kitchen. She found Nico first, which was faster. He was in the east corridor with his phone to his ear, and when he saw her face he ended the call without finishing the sentence. She told him about the car in 30 seconds. Nico listened. Then he said, "Stay here," and walked away fast enough that it was almost running without quite being running. Elena stood in the corridor and breathed. From somewhere in the house, she heard the sound of a door opening and closing. Then voices too far away to make out words, but the specific tone of voices in a conversation that has moved past pleasantries into something harder. Then silence. Then the sound of Adrian's voice, coming from the direction of the main hall, very clear and very controlled. "Tell him I said no." Another silence. Then, "Tell him I said no, and that he can come to my house if he wants to continue this conversation." Elena stood very still. A minute passed. Then 2. Nico came back down the corridor with his phone in his hand and an expression that was by his standards something close to agitated. "Dominic DeLuca just tried to have you removed from the house," he said. He called Victoria and instructed her to file a complaint with household management. The complaint was that you'd been behaving inappropriately with Adrian, specifically that you had been seen entering his private study on 2 separate occasions. Elena felt a cold, careful anger move through her. Which is true, and which is nobody's business," Nico said. Adrian refused the complaint. He told Victoria that staff movement within the household is his decision and not subject to outside input. He paused. Victoria apparently did not take that well. "Where is she now?" "In her rooms. She's not speaking to Adrian." He looked at Elena. "The car outside left about 4 minutes ago." "Because the complaint didn't work." "Because the complaint didn't work." He pocketed his phone. "Which means Dominic moves to the next option." "Which is?" Nico looked at her steadily. "We don't know yet. Which is the problem." She thought about Victoria alone in her rooms, not speaking to Adrian, having just been used by her father to try to remove a pregnant maid from a house, and having been told no by the man she was supposed to marry. She thought about what that felt like, being the instrument of someone else's plan and feeling the plan fail in your hands. She thought about what a person in that position might do next. "I need to talk to Victoria," Elena said. Nico looked at her as if she had said something in a language he didn't speak. "You need to." "Not now, but soon, within the next few hours." She met his gaze. She's starting to understand that her father has been using her. That's a window, small but real. If I can get to her before Dominic gets to her again. She cut your hair in front of 50 people. I know. She's been making your life difficult for 4 months. I know that too. Elena looked at him calmly. But she didn't kill Marco, and she's not going to keep protecting someone who did not when she finally understands what she's been protecting. Nico was quiet for a moment. You're either very brave or very foolish. My husband used to say the same thing. She almost smiled. He said the only way to tell the difference is how it turns out. She walked back toward the kitchen. Behind her, she heard Nico make a quiet sound that might in different circumstances have been the beginning of a laugh. The afternoon moved slowly. Elena worked and watched and waited with the particular patience she had developed over the last 11 months. The patience that comes not from calm, but from understanding that patience is sometimes the only tool available, and that using it badly is worse than not using it at all. At 4 in the afternoon, one of the upstairs maids found her in the pantry and told her with the careful neutrality of someone delivering a message they don't fully understand that Miss DeLuca would like to see her. Elena straightened her apron. She checked on the baby, still calm fine. "Tell her I'll come up," she said. Victoria's sitting room on the second floor was the most expensive-looking room Elena had been in since entering this house, which was saying something. It had the particular quality of a space that has been decorated to perform wealth rather than simply contain it, every object chosen to make a statement about what kind of person lived there. Victoria was standing when Elena entered, not sitting, which meant she had been pacing and had stopped when she heard the door. She looked different from the night before. The composure was mostly there. Victoria DeLuca had been trained in composure from the time she was old enough to stand upright in a room, but the layer underneath it was different. Unsettled. The particular unsettled quality of someone who has been holding something at a distance and has run out of distance to hold it. "Close the door," Victoria said. Elena closed it. They looked at each other across the room. "I know what you think of me," Victoria said. "I don't think you do," Elena said. Victoria's jaw tightened. Then she looked away toward the window, and for a moment her profile showed something that was almost a different person than the woman who had picked up scissors in a ballroom. "My father called me this morning," she said. "He told me that you had been going through restricted areas of the house. He told me that you were a security risk and that I needed to handle it." She paused. "He told me to have you removed." "I know," Elena said. "You know. I heard part of your phone call this morning. I didn't mean to. I was passing the sunroom." Victoria turned to look at her. Something moved in her expression. Not anger exactly. Calculation. The calculation of someone deciding how much honesty they can afford. "What did you hear?" she asked. "3 words," Elena said. "She already knows." Victoria held her gaze for a moment. Then she sat down, which was the first time Elena had ever seen her do anything that looked like something other than a calculated performance. "What do you know?" Victoria asked. Her voice was quiet and direct, and entirely stripped of the performance that normally lived inside it. Elena looked at her. She thought about Adrian. She thought about Nico. She thought about a black car with no visible plates that had parked outside this house for 2 hours and then left when a complaint failed. She thought about what Marco had been willing to risk to get the truth out. "I know what your father has been doing with the Valenti financial accounts," Elena said. "I know about the shell companies. I know about the transactions Marco documented before he died. And I know that the record of it was in the archive room of this house, and that 7 weeks ago someone accessed that room using your credentials and a device registered to your father." Victoria's face went very still. "I don't think you gave him your code," Elena said. "I think he took it." The stillness lasted another moment. And then Victoria DeLuca, who had lived her whole life performing strength, did something Elena did not expect. She pressed her hand over her mouth, not crying, not breaking down, just holding something in the specific gesture of a person who has just had the last thin wall between themselves and a terrible understanding come down all at once. "He told me it was a business matter," she said very quietly. Her hand dropped back to her lap. 6 months ago, he asked me for my access credentials to the Valenti archive. He said there were financial documents that affected our family's interests and that he needed to review them quietly before raising the issue with Adrian. He said it would be handled discreetly." She stopped. "I said no." I told him I wouldn't compromise my position in this house by giving him access to restricted areas. She looked at Elena. He said he understood, and then he took it anyway. I didn't know. Not then. Her voice was very controlled. But 3 weeks ago, one of our family's accountants mentioned something offhand, a reference to Valenti account numbers, that I had never been told about, that I had never seen, that he assumed I knew, because... She stopped again. Because the only way he could have known those numbers was if someone with access had pulled them. You knew 3 weeks ago, Elena said. I suspected 3 weeks ago. Victoria looked at her hands. I didn't want to know. That's different. Elena looked at her for a long moment. She had prepared herself for many versions of this conversation. She had not prepared herself for this one, for the specific weight of sitting across from someone who had made her life miserable for 4 months and finding underneath all the cruelty and the arrogance and the performance someone who was genuinely quietly terrified of what her own father had done. Victoria. She kept her voice even. My husband's name was Marco Moretti. He died in a car accident 11 months ago. The accident was staged. Someone had his brake line cut. She paused. I think you know whose name appears in the evidence he was gathering when he died. Victoria's face was very white. I'm not asking you to testify against your father, Elena said. I'm not asking you to do anything right now. I'm asking you to understand what's been happening in this house and what's still happening and what the car that was parked outside today was there for. She held Victoria's gaze. He sent it for me. The silence that followed was the longest silence Elena had sat in since the day she buried her husband. Then Victoria said in a voice she clearly did not trust to be louder. What do you need from me? Elena leaned forward. Tell me everything he told you, she said. Everything. From the beginning. Whatever you know, whatever you suspected, whatever he said, and whatever you chose not to hear. She held Victoria's eyes. Because your father is going to move again tonight, and when he does, I need to be ready. Victoria looked at her, and for the first time in the entire time Elena had lived inside this house, the woman who had treated her as invisible looked at her, truly, looked at her and said, All right. The last of the afternoon light came through the window and lay flat across the floor between them. Outside, somewhere in the city, the next move was already being made. Victoria talked for 90 minutes. She talked the way people talk when they have been holding something for too long, and the holding has finally become more exhausting than the telling. Not in a rush, not hysterically, but with the careful and deliberate pace of someone who has decided that accuracy matters more than comfort and is going to get every detail right, even when the details hurt. Elena listened. She asked 3 questions in 90 minutes. Every other sentence that came out of that room was Victoria's. What she learned was this. Dominic DeLuca had been planning the absorption of the Valenti organization for 6 years. Not a hostile takeover, something more elegant than that, something that looked from every public angle like a natural alliance between 2 powerful families cemented by marriage. The engagement between Victoria and Adrian had not been an arrangement born of affection or even mutual strategic interest. It had been engineered by Dominic across 2 years of careful maneuvering, positioning Victoria in Adrian's social circles, manufacturing the conditions for a relationship that Dominic could then accelerate once it took root. Adrian had not known. That was the part Victoria said with the most difficulty, the part where her voice went lowest and her eyes went to a fixed point on the wall. Adrian had not known because Adrian had wanted to trust. The engagement had let himself believe it was something real, and Dominic had been very good at making it look that way. He's good at that, Victoria said, making things look like what he needs them to look like. The financial corruption had started 3 years ago. Dominic had identified specific Valenti accounts that Adrian trusted because they were managed by a senior financial officer who had been with the family for 15 years and who had, it turned out, been on the DeLuca payroll for 8 of those 15 years. The money moved through shell companies, the same shell companies Marco had identified in his notebooks, and the transactions were structured to look like ordinary business variants unless you knew exactly what to look for. Marco had known exactly what to look for. "Did your father know about Marco's investigation before the end?" Elena asked. Victoria was quiet for a moment. "He mentioned a name to me once, about 14 months ago. He said there was a person asking questions that didn't need to be asked and that the situation would be resolved." She looked at Elena. "I didn't ask what that meant. I should have asked what that meant." Elena held that sentence for a moment. Then she let it go. There was no useful thing to do with it right now. "The archive room," she said. "What specifically was your father looking for?" He needed to know whether Adrian had already found the secondary records, the ones that cross-referenced the shell company transactions against the original Valenti account numbers. If Adrian had those, the whole structure collapsed. Dominic needed to know whether to accelerate the marriage timeline or whether he still had room to move. Victoria paused. "He told me this afterward, after I confronted him about the accountant's comment. He framed it as damage control." "What did he find in the archive?" "The secondary records were still there. Adrian hadn't pulled them. Dominic removed 2 key documents and replaced them with altered versions." She looked at her hands. "He told me that too. He said it like it was nothing, like it was just management." Elena thought about Nico's person going into the archive room right now, pulling the documents that were there, cross-referencing them against what Marco had recorded. She thought about the shape of the absence which files were missing, which had been altered, and how clearly that shape would point to exactly what had been done and by whom. She thought about how much time they had before Dominic DeLuca figured out that the situation was no longer under his control. She stood up. "I have to go." Victoria looked up. "Elena?" She said the name carefully, like she was testing how it felt. "I've been terrible to you." "Yes," Elena said simply. "I was frightened of you. From the beginning. You have a way of... I don't know how to explain it. You look at people like you're reading something that most people can't see. I noticed it in the first week, and it frightened me, and I handled that badly." Elena looked at her. "You put scissors to a pregnant woman in front of 50 people. I know." Victoria held her gaze without flinching. "I know. I'm not asking you to forgive that. I'm telling you that I'm going to do whatever I can to help fix this. Not because I think it makes us even. Because it's the right thing to do. And because my father killed your husband, and I did not know that, and now that I know it, I cannot pretend I don't." Elena looked at her for a long moment. "Then stay here," she said. "Don't call your father. Don't tell him anything has changed. If he contacts you, act like this afternoon never happened." She paused. "Can you do that?" Victoria straightened. It was a small movement, barely visible, but Elena recognized it, the movement of someone locating the version of themselves that has been buried under performance and fear, and choosing to operate from that version instead. "Yes," she said. Elena left. She found Adrian and Nico together in the study. The legal pad with her notes was on the desk between them, and beside it were several folders that had not been there before, and the atmosphere in the room was the atmosphere of 2 men who have been doing rapid, serious work and have arrived somewhere significant. Adrian looked up when she came in. "What did she tell you?" Elena sat down and talked for 8 minutes. She gave them everything. The timeline, the financial officer on the DeLuca payroll, the altered documents, the 6-year plan, all of it. She spoke quickly and precisely, the way she had learned to speak when time was the scarcest resource. When she finished, Nico set down his pen. "The financial officer," he said. "Thomas Reardon." "You know him," Elena said. 15 years with this organization, Nico said. "He has access to every financial system we operate. He processes every significant transaction." He paused. "He also knew about the secondary record system in the archive. He was one of the people who designed it." The room absorbed that. "He told Dominic about the secondary system," Adrian said. It was not a question. His voice had the particular flatness of someone working through something that makes him angry without letting the anger affect the processing. Which means when Dominic accessed the archive and didn't delete the secondary records, Elena said, either he was rushed and didn't have time or Reardon told him the secondary system didn't log individual document access. Nico finished. That it only logged room entry, which would have been true 18 months ago before we upgraded it. He looked at Adrian. Reardon doesn't know about the upgrade. It was done by an outside contractor, and I kept the documentation in my own files. The silence that followed had a specific texture, the texture of people understanding simultaneously that the thing that was supposed to protect the wrongdoers has just become the thing that destroys them. "Where is Reardon right now?" Adrian asked. "At his desk," Nico said. "Normal working day." "Keep it that way. Don't touch him yet." Adrian looked at Elena. "You said Dominic would move again tonight. He will. The complaint failed. The car failed. He knows I've been in this room twice." She paused. "He's going to do something direct." "What does that look like for a man like Dominic DeLuca?" "He'll use someone inside the house," she said. "Someone on payroll who owes him. Not someone connected directly to the DeLuca family too visible. Someone who looks like household staff." Nico's expression shifted. "We have 3 staff members hired through a DeLuca-affiliated placement agency. I flagged them when they were hired and kept them in low-access roles. They've been clean for the duration of their employment." "Until now," Elena said. Nico was already reaching for his phone. "Don't remove them," Adrian said quietly. "Watch them." Nico stopped. "Nico, if we remove them now, Dominic knows we know," Adrian said. "I want Dominic to believe his plan is still intact for as long as possible. Let the 3 staff members stay exactly where they are and have someone on each of them from this minute forward." "That's a narrow margin," Nico said. "I know." Adrian looked at Elena. "Which means Elena cannot be in an isolated position tonight. Not her room, not any corridor, not anywhere in this house where there's less than 3 people in visible range." "The kitchen closes at 9, Elena said. "Rosa will have staff there until 10 doing final cleanup." "Stay in the kitchen until 10, Adrian said. "Then I'll have someone I personally trust walk you upstairs." "You're treating this like a protection situation." "Because it is." She looked at him. "Adrian, the records. What did Nico's person find in the archive?" Adrian and Nico exchanged a look. The specific look of 2 men who have found something that exceeds what they expected. "2 documents were removed," Nico said. "The ones your notes reference the key cross-reference files. In their place were altered versions, the numbers changed in ways that made the transactions look routine." He paused. "But here is what Dominic did not count on. Marco also sent copies." Elena went still. 14 months ago, Nico said, 3 weeks before he died, Marco Moretti electronically transmitted copies of those same documents to an external storage account. He did it from a library computer, not from anything traceable to him or to you. He looked at her steadily. "I found the transmission record 6 months ago when I was looking for exactly this kind of backup. I couldn't access the account because I didn't have the credentials. But I knew the copies existed somewhere." The room was very quiet. "The credentials," Elena said slowly. "Yes." She thought about Marco at their kitchen table. She thought about the lockbox in the garage with the false bottom. She thought about what else might have been in that lockbox besides the notebooks, what other small, careful thing Marco might have left for her to find. "There was a piece of paper," she said, "in the lockbox with the notebooks. I thought it was a random number sequence. I kept it because I kept everything, but I didn't know what it meant." Nico looked at her. "Where is it?" "Not here. Same place as the notebooks." "Can you access it tonight?" "I can call someone who can bring it to me." She said it, and then immediately understood the problem with saying it, that she had just told 2 men that she had a contact outside this house, which meant a thread that Dominic DeLuca did not know about, and which needed to stay unknown, which meant the call had to be made carefully and from a phone that was not connected to anything inside this household's network. "My phone," she said. "I need to use a phone that—" "Use mine," Adrian said. He reached into his pocket and set a phone on the desk, not his regular phone, a second one, plain and unprogrammed. Prepaid, not registered. Take it. She picked it up. Make the call from the East Garden, Nico said. There's no camera coverage there after 6. I'll have someone at the garden entrance. She stood. Elena! Adrian's voice. The third time in 2 days that voice had stopped her at a door. She was starting to understand that it was not coincidence that he called her back, because something kept being unfinished between them. Some thought, or concern, or unnamed thing that resolved itself only when she turned around. Be careful. She looked at him. I've been careful for 11 months, she said. It's the one thing I'm genuinely good at. She walked out. The call lasted 4 minutes. The person on the other end was a woman named Diane Marco's oldest friend, the one person outside the notebooks who knew any part of what Elena was doing and why. Diane had been holding a sealed envelope for 11 months, with instructions not to open it unless Elena asked her to. She opened it on the phone, read out the number sequence, and Elena memorized it in the first pass. Then Diane said, "Are you safe?" And Elena said, "I'm getting there." She ended the call and stood in the garden in the early evening air and pressed the number sequence into her memory so deeply it would not move, then went back inside. She gave the sequence to Nico in the hallway outside the study, spoken quietly and only once. He wrote nothing down. He simply nodded and walked away. 20 minutes later, standing in the kitchen, helping Rosa organize the post-event dry goods, Elena heard through the specific acoustic quirk of this old house, through 2 floors and 3 walls, funneled by the central stairwell, in a way she had identified in her first month and catalogued as useful, the sound of a door slamming. Not Adrian's study, further, the direction of the main hall. Then a voice loud enough to carry even through the distance and the walls, with the kind of volume that comes not from shouting, but from the refusal to modulate from a person who has always been the loudest person in every room they enter, and has stopped believing that limits apply to them. Dominic DeLuca's voice. He had come to the house. Rosa looked at Elena across the kitchen. Elena kept her hands on the dry goods container she was holding, and kept her face neutral, and listened. She could not make out words. She could make out rhythm and temperature, a conversation that had started in the register of authority and was moving fast into something else. Something that did not have a social face on it anymore. Then Adrian's voice. Lower, not carrying as far, but with a quality that cut through the house differently than Dominic's volume did. Then silence. Then nothing. Rosa exhaled. Lord have mercy, she said very softly, and went back to her inventory. Elena set down the container and waited. 8 minutes later, Nico appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at Elena. He made a very small gesture with his head come, and she followed him out. Dominic is in the main sitting room with Adrian, Nico said low and fast. He came to remove you from the house personally. He told Adrian there had been complaints from multiple family members about your conduct, and that for the sake of the DeLuca family's comfort in this space, you should be let go immediately. And Adrian said that staffing decisions in this household are made by him and nobody else, and that Dominic was welcome to sit down and have a drink, or he was welcome to leave. He paused. Dominic sat down. He sat down, Elena repeated. Why? Because leaving would mean the conversation is over, and Dominic DeLuca wants information. He came here to find out how much Adrian knows. Nico's eyes were sharp. Adrian knows this. He's giving Dominic the conversation while I use the time. The account. We're in it. He held her gaze. The copies are there. Everything Marco transmitted, the original documents, unaltered with timestamps that predate anything Dominic could claim was a forgery. It's complete. Elena felt something move through her that was not relief and not triumph and not grief, but some combination of all three, that she had no clean word for the feeling of something you have worked toward for so long, finally existing in the solid, undeniable present tense. It's enough, she asked. It's more than enough, Nico said. It's everything. She stood there for a moment and breathed. Then what happens now? She asked. Now Adrian finishes his conversation with Dominic, Nico said. And then he makes a decision. About what? Nico looked at her steadily. About how to handle a man who murdered his cousin, who has been stealing from his organization for 3 years, who tried to have a pregnant woman removed from his household and possibly something worse. He paused. Adrian doesn't make those decisions quickly. He makes them right. She understood. This was not a world where right and legal were always the same thing. She had understood that when she walked through the door of this house 4 months ago, had understood it long before that. Marco's notebooks had made clear what world they were operating in, and what the options were for seeking justice inside it versus outside it. She had made her peace with that, or as much peace as she was capable of making with it. I want to be there, she said. Where? When Adrian confronts him. When the whole thing comes out, I want to be there. Nico looked at her for a long moment. That's not safe. No, but it's mine. She held his gaze. My husband. My investigation. 11 months of my life. The baby I've been carrying through all of it. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. I want to be there. Nico was quiet. I'll tell Adrian, he said. The call came at 8:15. Elena was still in the kitchen with Rosa, and it was not a call. It was Nico in the doorway again, and this time his expression was different from any expression she had seen on him before. Not alarm, not urgency. Something else. Something that had a kind of weight to it that made her straighten before she even knew what he was going to say. There's been a development, he said. She followed him out. What had happened was this. While Dominic was in the sitting room with Adrian having the conversation that was designed to buy Nico time, one of the 3 DeLuca-affiliated staff members had moved. Not dramatically, not a forced entry, not anything that would have been obvious without the watcher that Adrian had assigned. He had simply taken something from a room on the 3rd floor, a room he had no business being in, and passed it to a person who had come in through the delivery entrance, and who was not a vendor, and whose presence had not been logged. The watcher had followed. The item had been identified. It was a document from Elena's room. From my room, Elena said. She stopped walking. What document? A letter, Nico said. Handwritten. Addressed to you. Found under your mattress. The bottom fell out of her stomach. She had a letter under her mattress. She had put it there in the first week, a letter she had written to her unborn child. A private thing. Something she had written on a night when the grief and the fear and the impossible weight of what she was doing had become too much, and she had needed to put words somewhere outside herself. It said nothing compromising. It was not evidence of anything. But it had her handwriting, and it had specific dates, and it referenced briefly obliquely in the emotional shorthand of a letter written for a child who would not read it for years, the reason she was in this house. He took it to use against me, she said. To prove intent, Nico said. To show Adrian that you came here with a deliberate agenda. To make the case that you manipulated your way into the household under false pretenses, which under certain interpretations of organizational security protocol, makes me the threat instead of Dominic. She finished. Yes. She moved before Nico finished the word. She did not run. She walked very fast, which in the long corridors of this house was almost the same thing, and she went directly to the main sitting room, and she opened the door without knocking. Adrian and Dominic DeLuca both turned to look at her. Dominic DeLuca was 61 years old, and built the way men are built when they have been powerful for so long that the power has become physical, has settled into the way they take up space. He had silver hair and the kind of face that has practiced authority until it looks like nature. He looked at Elena with the expression of a man who expected this interruption and had already decided what to do with it. Elena, Adrian said. His voice was even. He had not expected her to come through that door, but he recovered in under a second, and his expression shifted to something that told her he understood there was a reason. He sent someone to my room, Elena said. She looked directly at Dominic. One of the staff members placed through your agency. He took a personal letter from under my mattress and passed it to someone at the delivery entrance 20 minutes ago. Dominic looked at her with exactly the amount of surprise you would expect from a man who had just been caught doing something and had prepared his response in advance. I don't know what you're talking about. Your watcher, Adrian said, not to Elena, but to Nico, who had come in behind her. Documented, Nico said. Photographed. The staff member in question is currently in the East Courtyard. The delivery contact is still on the property. Something shifted in Dominic's face. Not fear. Men like Dominic DeLuca do not show fear, but the specific recalibration of someone who has realized that the board they thought they were playing on has more pieces than they accounted for. Whatever this woman has told you, Dominic said, his voice completely steady, you need to consider the source. She came into your home under false pretenses. She has a manufactured agenda. She is not who she has presented herself to be. That's true, Adrian said. Elena looked at him. She's not who she presented herself to be, Adrian said. He was looking at Dominic, and his voice was perfectly precisely calm. She presented herself as a maid. She is actually the widow of my cousin Marco Moretti, who was killed 14 months ago on your order to prevent him from exposing what you've been doing to my organization for 3 years. The room went absolutely still. Dominic DeLuca held Adrian's gaze. He was very good. He was, Elena thought, one of the best she had seen at maintaining composure under pressure. His face showed nothing for 4 full seconds. Then he said, "That is a serious accusation." "Yes," Adrian said. "It is." "You have no evidence." "I have Marco's original documents," Adrian said, "transmitted to external storage 14 months ago before you had him killed. I have the digital access log showing your device entering my archive using Victoria's credentials. I have a financial transaction record going back 3 years showing money leaving my organization through shell companies directly traceable to your family. I have a member of my financial staff who will confirm when he understands what the alternative is that he has been on your payroll for 8 years. A pause. "And I have a witness to the conversation in this room right now." Dominic looked at Elena. She held his gaze. "You should have left well enough alone," Dominic said, and the audience was no longer Adrian. He was looking at Elena, directly, without the performance, with the plain and specific look of a man who is making an assessment. "Your husband was thorough, I'll give him that. But he made the mistake of trusting the wrong person with what he found, and it cost him. You've made the same mistake." "What mistake?" Elena asked. "Trusting that power can be beaten from the inside." He said it with the particular condescension of someone explaining a basic error to a person too naive to have seen it coming. "You came into this house with your little investigation and your dead husband's notebooks, and you thought that finding the right evidence was the same as having the right protection. It isn't. It never has been." "You're right about one thing," Elena said. She was very calm. The calmness came from somewhere deep and old and built from 11 months of mornings where she had decided every single day not to collapse. "I came here with evidence. That part you have correct. Everything else you have wrong." Dominic watched her. "I didn't come here trusting that evidence was enough," she said. "I came here knowing that evidence without the right person is nothing. I came here to find out whether the right person was inside this house or whether the corruption went all the way to the top." She paused. "I found my answer." Dominic's expression shifted, just slightly, just enough for her to see that he was recalculating again, and that this recalculation was not going the direction he needed it to go. "Adrian," he said, turning away from Elena in the specific way that men like him turn away from women who have said something they do not want to engage with. "Whatever this woman has told you, whatever she's convinced you of, consider what you're about to destroy. Our families have worked alongside each other for—" "Don't," Adrian said. The word landed like a door closing. "Don't stand in my house and talk to me about our families." Adrian's voice was still quiet, still even. But there was something beneath it now, the thing that Elena had sensed when she first watched him cross the ballroom 2 nights ago, the thing that lived under the control, older and harder, and far less patient than the surface. "You had my cousin killed. You used my organization to fund your own operations. You manipulated my engagement to position your family to absorb what I built. You sent someone to that woman's room tonight. He paused once. And you sat in my house and looked me in the eye and lied. Dominic DeLuca looked at Adrian Valenti, and Elena watched Dominic understand in real time that he had miscalculated something fundamental. That he had looked at Adrian and seen what he needed to see a man alone without an heir potentially isolatable, and had missed what was actually there. Had missed the person in front of him for the idea he had constructed of the person. It was the same mistake Elena thought that he had made about her. The door opened. 3 of Adrian's men came in, not rushing, not dramatic, simply there arranged in the room in a way that communicated a complete absence of available options. Nico moved to the side. Elena stayed where she was. Reardon is in custody, Nico said to Adrian. And we have the staff member and the delivery contact secured. Adrian nodded once. He looked at Dominic. You're going to walk out of my house, he said. You're not going to make a call. You're not going to speak to Victoria. You're not going to contact anyone in your organization. You're going to go home and you're going to sit with what you've done. He paused. And then we're going to talk. On my terms at my time with everything I have on the table between us. Do you understand me? Dominic looked at him. The performance had come back up, the controlled face, the measured expression of a man who is not done yet. But underneath it, Elena could see the first clean evidence of something she had been waiting 11 months to see on the face of someone who deserved it. He was afraid. I understand, Dominic said. He walked out. The room breathed. Elena stood in the middle of it and felt the specific sensation of a door that has been closed for a very long time, beginning very slowly to open. Adrian looked at her. He looked at her for a long moment. Not the examining look from 2 days ago, not the calculating look of a man assessing a new variable. Something else. Something she did not yet have a name for. You're all right? He asked. Yes. She was surprised to find it was true. Yes, I'm all right. The letter he took. It doesn't matter now. She looked at him. It was a letter to my baby. He can read it. There's nothing in it that changes anything. What did it say? She was quiet for a moment. That I was going to fix it, she said. That whatever happened to their father, I was going to make it right. That they would be born into a world where the people who hurt Marco had been held accountable. She paused. I wrote it when I wasn't sure I'd be able to keep that promise. Adrian held her gaze. You kept it, he said. She thought about that. She thought about 40 pages of handwriting, about a sentence underlined twice, about a job application handed in at a service entrance and 4 months of moving through rooms where nobody looked at her and the very long, very hard work of staying invisible while seeing everything. Not yet, she said. Not completely. He was still looking at her in that way she didn't have a name for. Nico, he said, not looking away from Elena. Yes, Nico said. I need you to arrange something. He paused. I need to call a meeting. The senior members. All of them within the organization and out. I need everyone in this house within 48 hours. Nico was quiet for a beat. All of them. All of them. That's a significant statement. It's meant to be. Adrian looked at Elena. I want it done correctly. I want the truth said in front of every person it involves, and I want it said once. His jaw set. No more things hidden in archives. No more conversations in back corridors. No more pretending the foundation is solid when someone has been gutting it from underneath. What will you tell them? Elena asked. He looked at her. The truth, he said. Starting with who Marco Moretti was and what he found and what it cost him. And ending with the fact that his child... He stopped. He looked at her stomach and then back at her face. That his child has a place in this family. That the Valenti name has a future that wasn't taken from it. He paused. If that's what you want. Elena stood there. She thought about everything she had walked into this house wanting. Evidence. Justice. The truth about Marco. She had come here for those things, had shaped her entire existence for 11 months around those things, had organized her grief and her fear and her determination around those things as the only goals that mattered. She had not come here wanting this. She had not planned for this. She was not sure, standing in this room right now, what this was. She only knew that it was real, and that it was larger than what she had prepared for, and that the baby moving inside her, suddenly active, a strong, precise kick, as if registering the weight of the moment, was the most real thing in the room. She pressed her hand to her stomach. "Tell the truth first," she said. "We can figure out the rest afterward." Adrian nodded. For just a moment, in the quiet that settled over the room, something passed between them, not spoken, not dramatic, not the kind of thing that announces itself. The simple acknowledgement of two careful people who have been through something large together and are only beginning to understand how large it actually was. Then Nico said very dryly, "I'll start making calls." And the room returned to motion. But the thing that had passed between them did not go away. It settled into the space between two people who have earned each other's trust in the hardest possible way and stayed. Outside, the city of Chicago moved through its ordinary evening. The streets filled and emptied and filled again. People went home to their families, their dinners, their ordinary lives. Inside the Valenti house, 48 hours began to count down. And Elena Moretti, who had come here to finish something, stood in the center of what was beginning and felt both things at once, the ending and the beginning, pressed together, inseparable. The same way grief and hope are always pressed together in the same chest. The same breath. The same quiet moment before everything changes. She breathed in. She was ready. Nico made 12 calls in 4 hours. By midnight, 9 of the 12 had confirmed. By 2 in the morning, all 12 had. Whatever Adrian Valenti's summons meant to the people who received it, and it meant something different to each of them, depending on what they had done and what they suspected he knew, not a single one of them said no. That was the particular kind of authority Adrian had built across 8 years. Not the authority that comes from being the loudest or the most violent, but the kind that comes from being the most consistently right, and from making sure that everyone in his world understood that when he asked for something, the cost of refusing was always higher than the cost of complying. Elena did not sleep. She sat in the kitchen with Rosa after the rest of the staff had gone, and Rosa made tea without being asked, and set it in front of her and said nothing, which was the particular kindness of a woman who has lived long enough to know that some nights don't need commentary. At some point after midnight, Rosa put her hand briefly on Elena's shoulder and said, "Whatever happens tomorrow, you did right by your husband." Elena looked at her. "You knew. I suspected." Rosa sat back down across from her. "I've worked in this house 12 years. I know what a person who belongs here looks like, and I know what a person who came here for a reason looks like. You came here for a reason from the first day." She wrapped her hands around her own cup. "I also know that reasons can be good reasons. I've been hoping yours was." "It was," Elena said. "I know." Rosa looked at her steadily. "I also know that Mr. Valenti has not looked at another person the way he looks at you since before his father died. I don't know what that means for you, and I'm not asking. I'm only saying that I've seen it and it's real." Elena looked at the table. "Rosa, I'm an old woman. I say what I see." She stood and picked up both cups. "Go get some sleep. Tomorrow requires a full person." Elena went upstairs. She lay in the narrow bed and put her hand on her stomach, and felt the baby's slow, steady movement, and breathed through the feeling of standing at the edge of something enormous. She thought about Marco. She thought about him sitting across from her at their kitchen table on an ordinary Tuesday evening, 3 weeks before he died, looking at her with an expression she had not fully understood at the time, thoughtful and a little sad, and underneath both of those things, deeply certain. Like a man who has made a decision he cannot unmake and has found peace with it, even though the peace costs him something. She had asked him what he was thinking. He had said, "I'm thinking that some things are worth doing even when you know how much they're going to cost." She had not known then what he meant. She understood it now completely. She fell asleep just before 3 and woke at 6 with the particular clarity that sometimes comes from the few hours of sleep that follow a long period, without it sharp and clean and ready, in a way that felt less like rest and more like a decision her body had made while she wasn't paying attention. She got dressed. She went downstairs. Adrian was already in the kitchen, not sitting at the breakfast table, not with coffee, not doing the things that the household's rhythms would have expected from him at 6 in the morning. He was standing at the counter with his back to the door, and he turned when she came in, and she could see from the quality of his stillness that he had not slept at all. "You should have rested," she said. "So should you." "I slept 3 hours. I'll sleep after." He looked at her. "How are you feeling?" "Like today matters," she said simply. He almost smiled. "It does." He turned back to the counter and poured a second cup of coffee without asking and set it in front of the nearest stool. "Sit. I need to tell you how today is going to go." She sat. "The meeting is at 2 o'clock, he said. 14 people in the main hall, 6 senior members of this organization, 3 associated family representatives, 2 legal advisors, the DeLuca family representative, and Dominic himself." He paused. "Reardon will also be present." "Reardon," she said. He agreed to speak. He had a long conversation with Nico last night, and he arrived at an understanding about what cooperation looks like versus what the alternative looks like. His voice was dry. He made the right choice. "And Victoria?" Adrian was quiet for a moment. "She asked to be present." I said yes. Elena looked at him. "She called me at 11 last night," he said. "She told me everything she told you, and then she told me several things she didn't tell you. Specifically, she told me that her father approached her 8 months ago before the engagement was formalized, and told her that if the Valenti organization ever produced an heir outside the marriage arrangement, the entire DeLuca strategy collapsed. He told her that any such situation would need to be managed." He set down his cup. "She said she didn't understand what he meant at the time. She says she understands now." "Does she?" Elena asked carefully. "I think she does." He looked at her. "I also think that Victoria DeLuca has spent her entire life being the instrument of her father's plans, and has only just at 28 years old understood that this is what she has been. And that the understanding is—" He stopped. "It's not comfortable to watch, frankly." Elena thought about Victoria sitting in her chair with her hand pressed over her mouth. She thought about the movement of a person locating themselves beneath all the performance. "She's not a bad person," Elena said. "No." Adrian picked up his cup again. "She's a person who was raised by a bad person and learned to mistake his values for her own. That's not the same thing, and it's not nothing, but it's not the same thing." They sat in the quiet kitchen in the early morning and drank their coffee and did not speak for a while, which was its own kind of conversation, the specific comfort of 2 people who have gotten past the point where silence needs to be filled. "After the meeting," Elena said finally, "what happens to Dominic?" "He answers for what he did," Adrian said. "All of it. Reardon's testimony combined with Marco's documents is enough to take to a federal prosecutor, specifically the one prosecutor in this city that I am certain Dominic has not managed to compromise, and I am certain because I spent the last month verifying it." He paused. "Marco's evidence goes to a legal proceeding. The financial crimes are documented. The murder of Marco Moretti is documented." A beat. "The people inside this organization who cooperated with Dominic's plan are dealt with separately, on my terms, in my way." She understood what he meant by that, and she did not ask him to explain it further. "And the organization itself," she asked, "continues." He looked at her. "Differently than before. I've been thinking about that, about what I want it to look like going forward. What I want to build instead of what I've been maintaining." His expression shifted. "I spent 8 years holding together what my father left because I thought holding it together was the same as honoring it. I'm not sure that's true anymore." "What changed?" He looked at her directly. Someone showed me that protecting people is a different thing from controlling them. She met his gaze. I said that to you. Not in those words, but yes. She looked at her cup. Adrian, she said, I need to ask you something before this afternoon, and I need you to answer it honestly. Always. The child, she said. What you said last night about the Valenti name, about the future of the family. I need to understand what you meant by that because I need to know what I'm walking into this afternoon, and I need to know it on my terms, not in a room full of people where I don't have room to think. He was quiet for a moment. I meant that my cousin's child has a legitimate claim to a place in this family, he said. That this child exists and is a Valenti, and deserves to be acknowledged as one. That the people in that room this afternoon are going to understand that clearly before they leave. He looked at her. I did not mean that you are obligated to anything. I did not mean that the acknowledgement comes with conditions or expectations, or anything that requires you to become something you didn't choose to become. I meant that the door is open, and what you do with it is entirely your decision. She looked at him for a long moment. That's a very careful answer, she said. I'm a careful person. I know. She held his gaze. What do you want, Adrian? Not what's right, not what's correct, not what you owe to Marco's memory. What do you personally want? The kitchen was very quiet. He looked at her, and she could see him doing the thing that she had watched him do since the first night in his study, the assessment, the calculation, the precise management of what he said and how he said it. And then she watched him for the first time set it down. I want this child to grow up knowing who they are, he said. I want them to grow up with their father's name and their father's history and the whole truth of where they come from without anything buried or hidden or managed away. A pause. And I would like to be part of that, in whatever way makes sense to you. She breathed. Okay, she said. Okay. That's enough for now, she said. We'll figure out the rest after today. He looked at her. You do that a lot, he said. Do what? Take enormous things and make them manageable. His voice was quiet. I don't know how you do it. Practice, she said. 11 months of practice. She stood. I'm going to eat something and get dressed. I'll be ready by 1. She walked out of the kitchen, and behind her, she heard Adrian let out a long, slow breath that sounded like something he had been holding since approximately 2 in the morning. By 11 o'clock, the house had changed in the way that a house changes when something significant is about to happen inside it. A quality of readiness in the air. A collective held breath among the staff who understood that the afternoon meeting was not a routine gathering, that whatever it was would have consequences that moved through the household like a change in weather. Nico found Elena in her room at 11:30. Dominic arrived 20 minutes ago, he said. He brought 2 men with him. His lawyers? No, not lawyers. Nico's expression was specific. Witnesses, I think. People he trusts to have in the room when things go badly for him, because men like Dominic always prepare for the possibility of things going badly even when they believe they won't. How does he look? Nico considered. Controlled. The way he always looks. But there's something behind it. He paused. He doesn't know about Reardon yet. He doesn't know what the financial records show. He came here thinking he's walking into a confrontation that he can still manage. He looked at Elena. He's going to find out very quickly that he's wrong. And Victoria, already here. She's in the east sitting room. She hasn't spoken to her father since last night. He paused. She asked about you. What did she ask? Whether you were ready. He looked at her steadily. I told her yes. Elena straightened the front of her dress, the good one, the dark one she had packed when she first came here, because she had known that there would be a day when she needed to be present and visible and entirely herself. She had not known when that day would come. She had simply been ready for it. Is there anything I need to know before I go in? She asked. One thing, Nico said. He reached into his jacket and took out a folded piece of paper and held it out to her. This came in an hour ago from the federal prosecutor's office. They received the digital copies of Marco's documents through a secure channel at 7 this morning. This is their initial response. She took the paper and unfolded it. She read it once, then she read it again. They're opening a formal investigation, she said. Effective today, Nico said. The documents Marco transmitted constitute sufficient basis for a federal case. The prosecutor wants to interview you within the week. He paused. It also means that whatever happens in the room this afternoon, Dominic DeLuca cannot make it disappear. The federal case exists independent of anything this organization does or doesn't do. Elena folded the paper carefully and put it in her pocket. Marco filed it, she said quietly. 14 months ago, through a library computer, he transmitted every document he had to external storage and never told anyone except the one person whose loyalty he was certain of. She pressed her hand briefly to her stomach. He knew he might not survive long enough to use it himself, so he made sure it would survive without him. Nico was quiet for a moment. He was very thorough, he said. He was, she said. He really was. She walked out of the room and down the corridor and toward the main hall, and Nico walked beside her, and neither of them said another word until they reached the door. 14 people in the main hall turned to look at her when she walked in. She had prepared herself for this, the weight of that many eyes, the specific quality of attention that settles on a person when they enter a room where their existence is the central fact under discussion. She had prepared for it, and she was still not entirely ready for it when it actually happened. She found Adrian immediately. He was standing at the head of the long table, not seated, and he looked at her when she came in, with an expression that said clearly, and without ambiguity, "You belong here." She went to the seat that Nico indicated 3 chairs down from Adrian's left, and she sat down and folded her hands on the table and looked at the room. Dominic DeLuca was directly across from her. He looked at her the way a chess player looks at a piece they underestimated, not with anger, but with the recalculation of someone reassessing the board. His 2 men were seated on either side of him. Victoria was at the far end of the table, not looking at her father, her hands in her lap, her posture very straight. Reardon was 3 seats down from Dominic. He did not look at anyone. Adrian waited until the room was completely still. "I'm going to say something," he said, "and then I'm going to let the evidence speak for itself. And then we're going to have an honest conversation about what happens next. I want everyone in this room to understand that what is said here today is final. This is not a negotiation. This is not an opening position. This is the truth laid out completely, and everyone here is going to hear it in full before we move forward." He paused. The room did not breathe. 14 months ago, my cousin Marco Moretti was murdered. The murder was staged to look like a car accident. The purpose of the murder was to prevent Marco from exposing a coordinated financial crime that has been operating inside this organization for 3 years, run by an external party using a compromised member of my own financial staff. He looked at Reardon, then at Dominic. Both of those individuals are in this room. Something moved through the people at that table. Not shock exactly, because these were people who understood what it meant to be called to a meeting like this one, and had spent the last 12 hours preparing themselves for something significant. But hearing it said plainly by Adrian Valenti in his own house with that specific quality of absolute certainty in his voice landed differently than any preparation could account for. One of the senior members, a man named Greco, who had been with the organization for 20 years, turned to look at Dominic. He said nothing. He just looked. Dominic held Adrian's gaze. "You're making a very serious accusation without—" "Sit down," Adrian said. Dominic had been in the process of standing. He stopped. "You'll have the opportunity to speak," Adrian said. "That opportunity is not now." Dominic sat. Nico distributed documents. 12 pages organized chronologically, each page a specific piece of the evidence chain, the transaction records, the shell company connections, the timeline of the financial crimes, the archive access log, the digital transmission confirmation from Marco's external storage. Every person at the table received a copy. The room was silent as they read, silent as they. Elena watched the faces. She watched the senior members absorb what they were reading, Watch their expressions move from careful neutrality to something harder and more specific. Watch the moment when each of them crossed the line from uncertainty to understanding. She watched Victoria hold the pages without reading them, already knowing what they said. She watched Reardon stare at the table. She watched Dominic read every page with the meticulous attention of a man looking for a flaw, a gap, anything that could be challenged, and finding nothing. When Adrian judged that the room had had enough time, he spoke again. "Thomas Reardon will now describe his role in what occurred," he said. Reardon looked up. He was 63 years old and had the look of a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had arrived against his expectations at a place where setting it down was finally more possible than continuing to carry it. He did not look defiant. He did not look calculating. He looked tired. "I was approached 8 years ago," Reardon said. His voice was steady. "By a representative of the DeLuca family. They had information about a personal situation in my life, a financial situation that I had not disclosed to the organization. They offered to manage that information in exchange for access. Gradual, limited, specific access." He looked at his hands. It did not stay limited. He spoke for 11 minutes. He described the account structure, the transaction routing, the specific methods used to make DeLuca money movement look like ordinary Valenti operational variants. He described the 6-month period that Marco's documents covered and the specific transactions that Marco had identified as the key evidence. He described the moment 14 months ago when Dominic had told him that the problem was being handled. He described what he had understood handled to mean. When Reardon finished, the room was very quiet. One of the senior members set down his copy of the documents. He looked at Dominic DeLuca across the table. "All of this," the man said. His voice was very flat. "Under this roof, using this family's name." Dominic said nothing. "Look at me," the man said. Dominic looked at him. "We welcomed your family," the man said. "We sat at tables with you. We sent men to your events and invited you to ours and treated you as someone whose word had weight." He shook his head once. "And all of it was a performance. All of it was cover for taking from us." "The financial concerns of both families," Dominic began. "Don't." The man's voice went flat as concrete. "Don't dress it up. Don't make it something other than what it was." Dominic closed his mouth. Adrian looked at Elena. She understood the look. This was the moment he had designed the meeting for, not just to expose what Dominic had done, but to make sure that the exposure happened in front of every person whose understanding of it would matter. "There is one more thing that everyone in this room needs to know," Adrian said. He waited until every face was toward him. "Marco Moretti was my cousin. His mother was Giulia Valenti, my father's younger sister, who left this family 30 years ago, under circumstances that I am now revisiting with a clearer understanding than I had before today." He looked at Elena. "Marco investigated this organization not as an outsider, but as someone whose blood connection to it gave him a stake in what happened to it. He died for that. His wife." He said the word simply, without drama, without performance. "Has spent 11 months carrying that investigation forward, carrying his child and working inside this house at considerable personal risk to bring us to this day." The room looked at Elena. All of it. All 14 people, plus Reardon, plus the 2 men Dominic had brought, all of them looking at the pregnant woman 3 seats to Adrian's left, who had been a maid in this house 4 days ago. Elena did not look away. She sat with it, the weight of that many eyes, the significance of that many people understanding simultaneously what she had been and what she had done. And she breathed through it, and did not let her face show anything other than what she felt, which was a very old and very specific kind of grief that had been waiting 11 months for this moment to arrive so it could finally move. "Marco Moretti's child," Adrian said, "is a Valenti. That is not a question. That is a fact, and it is acknowledged by this family now in front of every person in this room." Dominic DeLuca made a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound of a man absorbing the specific blow of understanding that the thing he spent 6 years trying to prevent has happened anyway. That despite everything he did, and everything he built, and everyone he hurt, the outcome he was engineering against has arrived. Victoria looked at her father. Elena watched that look. It was not anger what Victoria's face showed in that moment. It was not the sharp, clean emotion of someone who has been wronged discovering their wrongdoer. It was something quieter and more desolate than that, the look of a daughter understanding perhaps for the first time in her life that the man who raised her is capable of things she cannot defend, cannot soften, cannot reframe. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked away. And that, Elena thought, was perhaps the most complete accounting of all. Dominic spoke. He did not yell. He did not threaten. He was too smart for that, too experienced, too aware that the room had already turned in a direction that volume would not reverse. He made a controlled, measured, articulate case for the financial arrangements being mutual for the relationship between the families, being the context that made the transactions legitimate for Marco's evidence being partial, and therefore misleading. He was very good at it. He was good enough that Elena could see two people at the table listening with the specific attention of people who are not convinced, but are not entirely unconvinced either. She looked at Adrian. He gave her the smallest nod. She reached into her pocket. She took out the folded piece of paper Nico had given her at 11:30, and she set it on the table, and she said quietly and clearly into the first pause in Dominic's argument. This morning, the federal prosecutor's office confirmed the opening of a formal investigation based on Marco's documents. The case exists independent of this room and independent of this organization. Whatever case is being made at this table, the federal case is already running. The room went still again. Dominic stopped speaking. Elena continued. My husband transmitted complete, unaltered, time-stamped copies of every document he gathered to external storage before he died. Those copies were received by the federal prosecutor at 7 o'clock this morning. The investigation is not contingent on anyone's cooperation. It is not contingent on what is decided here today. It exists. She set the letter flat on the table. Dominic DeLuca's financial crimes are now a federal matter. The two men Dominic had brought with him exchanged a look. It was a very fast look, barely a movement. The kind of look that passes between people who have just understood simultaneously that the situation has changed in a way that affects their own exposure, their own liability, their own assessment of where their loyalty should sit in the next 30 seconds. One of them looked at Adrian. Mr. Valenti, he said, I think it's time for a different conversation. Dominic turned to look at the man. The man did not look back at him. And just like that, in that small, quiet shift of a single person's gaze, Dominic DeLuca's last line of support moved. Elena had read in Marco's notebooks a passage about the nature of power. Marco had written it in the margin of one of his pages. Not as evidence, but as an observation, the kind of thing you write when you're spending long hours with something ugly, and you need to say a true thing to stay oriented. He had written, Power built on fear lasts exactly as long as the fear does. The moment the fear lifts, the power has nothing left to stand on. She had not fully understood it when she read it. Sitting in this room watching Dominic DeLuca's support structure dismantle itself in the space of 30 seconds, she understood it completely. Adrian looked at Dominic. You're going to make a full accounting, he said. Not here. With the prosecutor's office. You're going to do that because the alternative is that every piece of information I have, and it is considerable, goes to them without your cooperation attached to it. And you understand what cooperation versus non-cooperation looks like in a federal proceeding. He paused once. You have 2 weeks. After that, I go to them directly. Dominic looked at him. For one moment, just one something passed across Dominic DeLuca's face that Elena had not seen there before, and would not have predicted. Not fear, not calculation. Something rawer than either of those things. He looked old, not physically, in the way that a person looks old when the structure they have spent decades building comes down, and there is nothing left underneath it but the person who built it, standing in the wreckage, suddenly the same size as everyone else. "You'll burn what took 20 years to build," he said. "I'll build something that deserves to last," Adrian said. Dominic pushed back his chair. He stood. He straightened his jacket with the precise habitual movements of a man who has always used appearance as armor, who has never once in 61 years stood in a room without his composure fully intact, and does not know how to stop reaching for it even now. "Victoria," he said. His voice was very flat. Victoria did not move. "Victoria." There was something in it now, not command, not authority, but something more uncertain than either. The specific register of a parent who has understood that the relationship they assumed was solid has shifted beneath them. Victoria looked at her hands on the table. Then she looked up at him. "I'll contact you through a lawyer," she said. Her voice was quiet and entirely steady. "Not before." The silence lasted 4 seconds. Dominic walked out of the room. His 2 men followed the second one, pausing briefly at the door to hand Nico a business card, which was its own kind of statement about where those particular loyalties now resided. The room breathed. Greco, the 20-year senior member, looked at Adrian. "What do you need from us?" "Honesty," Adrian said. "Going forward. Complete, total honesty about everything inside this organization. If anyone in this room has been managing something they haven't told me about, now is the time. Not tomorrow, not next week. Now." Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then, a man at the far end of the table said, "There's a port arrangement I've been handling separately. It involves a DeLuca contact. I should have disclosed it." Another silence. "Tell me after," Adrian said. The man nodded. 2 other people spoke in the next 60 seconds. Small disclosures, minor things in comparison to what Dominic had been running, but things that had been managed in shadow nonetheless. Adrian listened to each one. He did not react with anger. He did not threaten. He simply listened and said, "Tell me after," and kept moving. Elena watched this and felt something she had not expected to feel in this room. Not just relief, not just the closing of something that had been open for 11 months, but something more specific and more particular than that. Hope. Not the fragile conditional hope of someone who has been surviving one day at a time and cannot afford to think further ahead. Something more solid than that. The hope of someone who is beginning to believe for the first time in a very long time that the future is a real place that she is actually going to reach. She pressed her hand to her stomach. The baby kicked. Strong. Certain. The decisive, unambiguous kick of a child who has in their own way been waiting for this day as long as she has. She exhaled. Across the table, Victoria was looking at her. The performance was entirely gone now. What remained was a face that Elena did not think many people had ever seen tired young in the way that people become young when the thing that was making them hard finally breaks, and underneath the tiredness, something that was working up the courage to be something other than what it had always been. "I'm sorry," Victoria said. She said it quietly. She said it directly. She said it without caveat or condition or the elaborate, careful language of someone managing how an apology is received. She just said it across the table in front of 14 people and let it be a plain and uncomplicated thing. Elena looked at her. "I know," she said. "Not I forgive you. Not it's all right." Those were not true, and she would not say them because they were not true, and she had spent 11 months building an existence on the premise that the truth matters more than the comfortable version of it. "But I know." 2 words that said simply, "I heard you. I see you. We are both here now in the aftermath, and it is real, and it counts." Victoria nodded once. She looked at the table. Her hands, which had been very still throughout the entire meeting, finally moved. She pressed them flat against the surface and breathed. Nico, very quietly beside Elena, said, "It's done." She looked at him. "The immediate part," he added. "The rest takes time. But the immediate part is done." She looked around the room. She looked at the documents on the table, the careful work of a man who had loved her and loved justice, and had believed right up until the end that there was a way to bring both of those things into the same place. She looked at Adrian, who was speaking quietly with Greco and two other senior members. His voice low and practical, already moving forward, already building the next thing. The way that people who are built for leadership build not by looking back at what fell, but by turning toward what comes next. She thought about Marco. She thought about Tuesday evenings and crossword puzzles in pencil, and a man who said that some things are worth doing even when you know the cost. She thought about 40 pages of handwriting and a sentence underlined twice. The child would change everything. He had been right. He had just not lived to see how. She put her hand over her stomach, and she sat in the quiet room in the aftermath of everything, and she let herself feel it, all of it, the grief and the relief and the exhaustion, and the strange tentative warmth of what was beginning all of it at once. The way you feel things when you stop trying to manage which ones get through. She let herself feel it, and it was she discovered something she could survive. More than survive, something she could carry forward. Adrian finished his conversation with the senior members. He turned and looked at her across the room. He did not say anything. He simply looked at her with that expression she had never entirely found a name for, the one that had been there since the night in the ballroom, the one that had been growing steadily more legible across 4 days of shared risk and shared purpose, and two very careful people slowly, carefully choosing each other. She looked back. The baby moved. The room around her held its breath for one long suspended moment, full of everything that had been broken and everything that was beginning to be rebuilt. Then someone asked Adrian a question, and he turned to answer it, and the room moved again. And Elena sat in it and breathed and let herself, for the first time in 11 months, stop holding everything so tightly. The future was a real place. She was going to reach it. The day after the meeting, Elena woke up and did not know what to do with herself. It was the strangest feeling she had experienced in 11 months. Stranger than grief. Stranger than fear. Stranger than the particular exhaustion of carrying a secret through every waking hour. She lay in the narrow bed in the servants' wing and looked at the ceiling and realized that the weight she had been moving under for so long had shifted, and the absence of it felt almost like a new kind of pressure, the way your ears ring in a room that has suddenly gone quiet after a long and sustained noise. She had nothing to investigate, no next step to calculate, no evidence to protect, no conversation to manage, no position to maintain. The work was done. She did not know in that first morning what came after the work being done. She got dressed and went downstairs and found the kitchen running at its ordinary rhythm, and Rosa at the stove, and the smell of coffee in the air, and she sat down at the table where she had sat 2 nights ago with tea and the weight of everything, and Rosa set a cup in front of her and said, "You look like someone who finished a marathon and just now realized they have to figure out how to walk normally again." Elena looked at her. "Is it that obvious?" "To me," Rosa said. "To everyone else you look fine." She sat down across from her. "What happens now?" "I don't know yet." "That's an honest answer." Rosa wrapped her hands around her cup. "Do you have somewhere to go before the baby comes?" Elena had thought about this in the small hours of the night. She had an apartment, small, the same apartment she and Marco had shared, that she had kept paying the rent on through 4 months in this house, because letting go of it felt like letting go of something she was not ready to let go of. She had Diane, who had been holding Marco's envelope and who would be there. She had the practical reality of a federal investigation that would require her presence and testimony for months to come. She had all of those things. She also had a conversation she had not yet had with Adrian Valenti about what "we'll figure out the rest afterward" actually meant when afterward arrived. "I have options," she said to Rosa. "Good." Rosa nodded once. Options are the important thing. Nico arrived in the kitchen doorway at 8:30 with the look of a man who has already been working for 3 hours and has a list of things to cover. "The prosecutor's office called," he said. "They want to schedule your initial interview for Thursday. I've also had 3 calls this morning from the senior members who were in the room yesterday, all of them asking for follow-up conversations with Adrian about the organization's direction going forward." He paused. And Victoria is asking whether she can speak with you before she leaves. Elena looked up. She's leaving. Today. She's arranged to go to her family's property in Connecticut. She's not returning to her father's household in the city. He held Elena's gaze. She and Adrian formally ended the engagement this morning. It was apparently a very short conversation. Elena absorbed that. How did Adrian take it? Nico was quiet for a moment. I think he took it the way a person takes something when they have already known for some time that it was coming and have made their peace with it before it arrived. He paused. He seemed lighter. Rosa made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Thursday works for the prosecutor, Elena said. Tell them yes. She stood. I'll go see Victoria. Victoria was in the same room where they had talked 2 days ago, but it felt entirely different now. The things that had made the room feel like a performance space. The careful objects, the particular arrangement of everything were the same, but the person in the room was not performing anything. She was packing a bag. Efficiently, practically the way people pack when they are leaving somewhere they are not planning to return to and do not feel the need to mourn. She looked up when Elena came in. You heard, she said. Nico told me. Elena came far enough into the room to close the door behind her. Are you all right? Victoria looked at the bag in front of her. I ended an engagement this morning to a man I genuinely cared about for reasons that were entirely my father's fault. I'm not sure all right is the right word. She paused. I'm clear. That's the better word. For the first time in I don't know how long I know exactly where I stand and why. That's not nothing, Elena said. No. Victoria set down what she was holding and turned to face her fully. I meant what I said yesterday, in front of everyone. I'm not going to unsay it in private. I know. I also need you to know something else. Victoria looked at her directly. My father did not act alone inside this house. Reardon was the financial piece, but there was a woman on the household staff. She was placed here specifically to watch you when it became clear that you might be a problem. She paused. I found out about her 2 months ago. I didn't know what to do with it and I told myself it wasn't my concern, and that was wrong. I should have told someone. Elena went still. Who? Her name is Pauline. She's been here 8 weeks. She works the upper floor laundry. Victoria held her gaze. I don't know what instructions she was given specifically. I only know that she reports to a man who reports to my father. Elena thought about Nico. She thought about the 3 DeLuca-affiliated staff members he had identified and had watched. She had not heard a 4th name. Nico doesn't know about her, she said. She didn't come through the same agency, Victoria said. She has a separate line. She's more careful. A beat. I'm telling you now because telling you yesterday in the meeting with everything else happening, I didn't think it would land right. I wanted to tell you privately. Elena looked at her. Thank you, she said. Victoria nodded. She turned back to her bag. Victoria. Elena did not move toward the door. What are you going to do after Connecticut? Victoria was quiet for a moment. I'm going to figure out what I actually want for the first time in my life without my father's priorities sitting on top of mine. She paused. I have a law degree I've never used because my father thought it was unnecessary for a woman in my position. I think I'm going to use it. She looked at Elena sideways. I have a particular interest in financial crime, it turns out. Elena looked at her. Something that was not quite a smile moved across Victoria's face. Take care of yourself, Elena said. You too. A pause. And Elena, the child. Whatever you decide, whatever shape things take, that child is going to know they were fought for. That's something not everyone gets. Elena walked out of the room and went directly to find Nico. She gave him the name in under 60 seconds. Nico's expression moved through 3 things in fast succession: surprise, that there was a 4th anger, that he had missed one. And then the controlled resumption of processing that was his most characteristic mode, and he made a call before she had finished walking away. She was at the end of the corridor when she heard him say very quietly and very specifically into the phone, "Find her before she moves, and bring me her phone." She kept walking. She found Adrian in his study. He was standing at the window again, the same window he had stood at the morning after the party, when the shape of everything had first begun to change, and he turned when she came in with the same quality of attention he had been giving her since the beginning. Complete, direct the attention of a man who does not look at people halfway. "Victoria told me about Pauline," she said. "Nico just called me." He turned fully. "She was picked up in the laundry corridor 10 minutes ago. Her phone has text messages to a number registered to one of Dominic's associates. The content is specific." He paused. "She was not here to watch you. She was here to do something more direct if the situation required it." The specific cold that moved through Elena was not fear exactly. It was the recognition of how close things had been all along, how narrow the margin, how careful the plan, how much had depended on timing and on Nico's cameras and on Victoria choosing to say a name this morning in a private room. "More direct," she repeated. "She had access to the kitchen," Adrian said, "and to the medical supplies in the third-floor storage." His voice was very even. "I want to be clear with you about that, because I think you deserve to know exactly what was at stake, and because I am not calm about it. But I am telling you without the anger showing, because the anger is not useful to this conversation." She looked at him. "You're furious." "I am very, very furious," he agreed. "But that's between me and the people responsible, and not something I'm going to put on you to manage." He looked at her. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." She meant it. Nothing happened. "Because of margins," he said. "Because of very narrow margins." "Margins are all we ever had," she said. "From the beginning. One margin after another." She held his gaze. "We made it through all of them." He looked at her for a long moment. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He sat across from her, not behind the desk in the chair that put them at the same level, which she had noticed he always chose when the conversation was something real rather than something professional. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Go ahead." "What do you want to do now?" He said it plainly. No preamble, no managing of the question, no softening. Not what needs to happen with the investigation, not what makes sense logistically. What do you want? She looked at him. In 11 months of absolute clarity about what she was doing and why she had not once asked herself that question. She had not allowed herself to ask it, had understood that the asking of it was a luxury she could not afford. That wanting things for herself was something she had put in a box and set aside for after, for when the work was done, for when it was safe to be a person who had preferences again, rather than just a person who had a mission. After was here now. She discovered sitting in this room that she had not prepared as well for after as she had for everything that came before it. "I want to go home," she said. "For a little while, to the apartment. I need to be somewhere that was Marco's before I figure out what comes next. I need to tell him I know that sounds—" "It doesn't sound like anything except honest," Adrian said quietly. She nodded. "I need a few days there. And then I need to think about what the baby needs and what the investigation requires, and—" She stopped. "And I need to think about this." She gestured between them with one hand, a small gesture, but clear. Adrian looked at the gesture, then at her. "Yes," he said. "So do I. I don't know what I'm able to give right now," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I don't know what shape I'm in or what shape I'll be in after she's born, and I don't want to say things I can't stand behind." He said. Elena blinked. Yes. I think it's a girl. I haven't confirmed, but I think so." Something happened on Adrian Valenti's face that she had not seen there before. Not in the study, not in the meeting, not in any of the 4 days of everything they had moved through together. Something completely undefended and very young and entirely real. "A girl," he said. "I think so." He was quiet for a moment. "Marco's daughter." "Yes." He looked at his hands, then back at her. "Take the time you need at the apartment. Take as long as you need." He held her gaze. "I'm not going anywhere. And whatever shape you're in when you've had time to breathe, I'll be here for that conversation whenever you're ready to have it." She looked at him. She had walked into this house 4 months ago, knowing exactly who Adrian Valenti was supposed to be, a name in her husband's notebooks, a powerful man behind a powerful organization, a variable to be assessed and either used or avoided. She had not planned for him to be this. She had not planned for the careful, precise, quietly decent man who had crossed a ballroom for her and called her back from doorways and sat in a kitchen at 6 in the morning and told her what he wanted without performing it. She had not planned for him at all. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he agreed. They sat for a moment in the particular quiet of two people who have said the important things and are letting them settle. Then Elena said, "The girl on the upper floor laundry, Pauline." "Being dealt with," Adrian said. "Appropriately. And Dominic's 2-week deadline. He'll cooperate," Adrian said. "He has no option that serves him better than cooperating. He knows that." A pause. "His lawyers called this morning. They're asking about the terms." "There are terms. There are always terms." He looked at her. "One of them is that the full record of what happened to Marco is part of the federal case. No private resolution, no quiet settlement. It goes through the legal process completely." "You didn't have to insist on that," she said. "Yes, I did," he said simply. She looked at him. "He was my family," Adrian said. "I didn't know him. I didn't protect him. I can't undo that." He paused. "But I can make sure the full truth of what happened to him is on the record. Officially. Permanently." She pressed her lips together. She was not going to cry in this room. She had made that decision approximately 4 seconds ago, and she was holding it. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," he said. "This is just what's right." She stood. She needed to move before the not crying became more difficult to maintain. "I'll leave for the apartment tomorrow morning," she said. "I'll have someone drive you." "I'll take a cab." He looked at her. "I'll take a cab," she repeated. And there was the smallest possible edge of humor in it. The humor of a woman who has been accepting his management of things for 4 days and is beginning to remember that she also knows how to manage things for herself. He almost smiled. "Take a cab." She walked to the door. "Elena." The 4th time in 5 days. She had counted. She turned. He was looking at her the way he had looked at her across the meeting room yesterday. The undefended look, the real one. "Tell him," Adrian said. "When you're at the apartment, tell Marco it's done." She stood in the doorway for a moment. "I will," she said. She walked out. Chun. Nico found her in the corridor 10 minutes later. "The federal prosecutor's office called again," he said, falling into step beside her. "They moved the interview to Wednesday. They also asked whether you'd be willing to provide an affidavit regarding the entry into the household the 4 months the specific evidence gathering, for the formal record." "Yes," she said. "Whatever they need." "There's also something else." He paused. "A journalist. Specifically a journalist from a major paper who has been investigating DeLuca financial practices independently for about 8 months. They contacted our legal team this morning. They've been working a parallel story and they have sourcing they're not sure is solid, and they're looking for corroboration." Elena thought about that. "What does Adrian want to do?" "He hasn't decided. He wanted your input first." She stopped walking. She turned that over. A journalist with 8 months of independent work looking for a story that was already being built, and the question of whether the full public truth was something they wanted or something they managed. "Tell Adrian yes," she said. Nico raised an eyebrow. "Marco tried to get the truth out and was killed for it," she said. "Whatever else happens, the federal case, the internal accounting, all of it, The full story should be told publicly, in a newspaper, where anyone can read it. She looked at Nico steadily. That's what he was working toward, not just justice inside a closed room. The actual truth out in the world where it can't be managed away. Nico was quiet for a moment. "I'll tell him," he said. She walked on. Rosa made dinner that night with the particular care of someone who understands that some meals are not just meals, who understands that sitting at a table and eating food that someone made for you with attention and intention is one of the specific and irreplaceable ways that human beings tell each other that they matter. There were 6 of them at the kitchen table. Elena Rosa, Nico, 2 of the household staff who had been with the organization longest, and unexpectedly, at Rosa's direct invitation, delivered in the particular tone that Rosa used when she was not actually extending an invitation, but issuing an instruction, Adrian. He sat at the end of the table in a kitchen he presumably had not sat in for years, if ever, and he ate Rosa's food and listened to the conversation around the table and said very little, and Elena watched him from across the way. She had been watching him since the beginning, carefully, precisely cataloging everything, and she noticed that he was for the first time since she had known him entirely still. Not the controlled stillness of a man managing a room. The natural stillness of someone who has found themselves in a place they did not expect to find comfortable and is discovering that comfortable is what it is. At one point, Rosa said something that made the whole table laugh, and Adrian laughed too. A genuine laugh, brief and startled, the laugh of someone who has not laughed at a dinner table in a very long time and has not realized how much they missed it. Elena watched his face when the laugh faded. He caught her watching. He did not look away. She did not either. Rosa, from her end of the table, watched both of them and said absolutely nothing, which was the most eloquent thing she said all evening. After dinner, when the table had cleared and the kitchen was returning to its nighttime quiet, Elena stood at the counter for a moment by herself and felt the baby move in a slow, sustained way. Not a kick, not the decisive, sharp movement of the days when she had been tense and operating under pressure, but a long and gentle rolling movement, the way a child moves when everything around them is still. She put both hands on her stomach. "We did it," she said quietly. Not to anyone in the room, to the child, and to Marco, and to herself, and to whatever part of the universe received those kinds of statements. "We actually did it." She left the next morning. She had one bag, the same bag she had arrived with 4 months ago, and she carried it downstairs herself and declined the offer of someone to take it from her because it was not heavy, and she had been carrying heavier things than that for a very long time. Rosa was in the kitchen doorway. "You'll come back," Rosa said. It was not a question. "I'll come back," Elena said. Rosa pulled her into a brief and firm hug and then let her go, which was exactly the right amount. Nico was in the main hall. He handed her an envelope without explanation, and she took it and put it in her bag. "The journalist's contact," he said, "and the prosecutor's Wednesday details. And," he paused, "a personal number, in case you need to reach someone and going through the main channels feels like too much." She looked at him. "Whose number?" "Mine," he said, "and on the second page another one." He held her gaze. "He put it there himself. He didn't tell me to mention that, but I'm mentioning it anyway." She looked at the envelope in her bag. "Thank you, Nico," she said, "for everything, including the 14 months you carried before I got here." He was quiet for a moment. "Marco was a good man," he said. "I should have found a way to protect him. You couldn't have known the timing." "No." He looked at her. "But I'm glad you came." She nodded. She walked toward the door. Adrian was on the front steps. She had not expected that. She had thought somehow that the conversation they had yesterday was the goodbye that he would let her walk out of the house in the same quiet way he handled most things, without ceremony, without the kind of dramatic farewell that neither of them were built for. Instead, he was on the steps with his hands in his jacket pockets and the cool morning air around him, and he looked at her when she came through the door with that expression she had finally found a name for sometime in the night. It was the expression of a man who has found something he did not know he was looking for, and is being very careful not to do anything that might cause him to lose it. "I thought you were letting me take a cab," she said. "I am," he said. "It's at the end of the drive." He paused. "I wanted to walk you out." She stood beside him on the steps. The morning was gray and cool, and the city was doing its ordinary morning things in the middle distance. "I'm going to do this differently," he said. He was not looking at her. He was looking forward at the drive and the gate and the city beyond it. The organization, the way it operates, what it's for. I've been thinking about it since... He stopped. Since someone told me that protecting people is a greater form of strength than controlling them. "You've been thinking about it since the night in the ballroom," she said. He looked at her sideways. "You crossed a room for a pregnant maid," she said. "I don't think that was a calculated decision. I think something in you had already started changing before I said a word to you." He was quiet for a moment. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe it took seeing something clearly to understand what I'd been seeing badly." He looked at her. "Either way." "Either way," she agreed. They stood for a moment. "The journalist," she said. "Adrian let it run. The full story. Don't try to manage the framing. Don't let the lawyers shape it into something comfortable. Let it be what it is." "I know." He nodded once. "I already told our legal team this morning." "And Reardon?" "Cooperating fully. He'll testify." A pause. "He asked about you. He said he wanted you to know he was sorry." She thought about a man who had made a compromised choice 8 years ago and had been paying for it in one form or another ever since. "Tell him I heard it," she said. Adrian looked at her. "Not forgiven," she clarified. "Heard. I'll tell him." The cab was at the end of the drive, waiting with the patient stillness of something that has been told to wait and is doing so without hurry. She picked up her bag. "Take care of yourself," Adrian said. "I will." She paused. "You too. I'll be here," he said, "when you're ready." She looked at him for a long moment. This man she had come into his house to investigate, whose cousin's blood ran in the child she was carrying, who had crossed a ballroom for her and built a case with her, and laughed at a kitchen table for the first time in years, and put his personal phone number on the second page of an envelope without telling anyone he'd done it. This man who was she, thought still figuring out who he was going to be, when the version of himself he'd been building for 8 years finally made room for something real. She thought they both were. "I know you will," she said. She walked down the drive. She did not look back, not because she did not want to, but because some moments are better carried forward than watched until they disappear. She had learned that in the first months after Marco died, had learned that the way you leave a place matters as much as the way you arrive, and that walking forward cleanly is its own kind of statement. She got in the cab. She sat with her bag on the seat beside her, and her hands on her stomach, and the city moving past the windows, and she let herself feel the full weight of going home to an apartment that still had Marco in it, in the specific way that the places where people lived stay full of them, long after they are gone. The way a person's particular habit of leaving a book face down on the coffee table, or keeping the good coffee on the second shelf, can hold more of someone than most words can. She had things to say to him. She had been saving them for 4 months, had been carrying them with her the way you carry things that need to be delivered to a specific place, and don't want to open before they arrive. She was going to sit in their apartment and say them. She was going to tell him what he had built. What his 40 pages of careful handwriting had become. What his transmission to external storage on a library computer had set in motion. She was going to tell him about the men in suits who sat at that table and read his evidence and could not find a flaw in it. She was going to tell him about Nico, who had carried the guilt of a missed appointment for 14 months and was now carrying something lighter. She was going to tell him about Adrian, because Marco, of all people, would have understood. Adrian would have recognized in him the particular project of a person who is trying to become more than what they were built to be. She was going to tell him about their daughter, because she knew now. She had known for weeks, had simply not let herself say it out loud until Adrian's face, when he said a girl made saying it out loud feel like the most natural thing in the world. A daughter who would grow up knowing exactly who her father was. Not a victim, not an absence. A man who saw something wrong and spent a year building the case against it, and transmitted every page of evidence to a place where it would survive him, because he had understood, with the particular clear-eyed courage of someone who knows the cost and chooses the action anyway, that some things matter more than safety. A man who had written in the margin of a 40-page document in a lockbox with a false bottom a sentence underlined twice and marked with a star. The child would change everything. And had been right. The cab moved through the city, and Elena sat in it with her hands on her stomach and her face toward the window, and the full weight of 11 months behind her, and the full weight of everything ahead. And she held both of those things without flinching, the way she had learned to hold difficult things, not by making them smaller, not by looking away, but by finding in the center of them the thing that was true. The thing that was true was this. Marco Moretti had believed that the truth was worth fighting for, that justice was worth the cost of pursuing it, and that the child coming into the world would inherit a better version of it if someone was willing to do the work. He had been right about all three. Elena Moretti had walked into the most dangerous house in Chicago, pregnant and grieving, and armed with nothing but 40 pages of her dead husband's handwriting and the stubborn, unbreakable conviction that the people who destroyed her family would be held to account. And she had made it so. Not because she was powerful, not because she had money or connections or the kind of protection that the people in that world traded in, but because she had been patient when patience was required, honest when honesty was dangerous, and brave in the specific, unglamorous daily way that real courage actually works, not all at once, not dramatically, but one careful step at a time, through every morning when it would have been easier to stop. The cab pulled up to her building. She got out. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment with her bag in her hand, and the morning air around her and her daughter steady and present beneath her hands. Then she walked inside. She was going home, and the woman who had walked into that house as a maid, invisible and underestimated, and carrying everything that mattered, walked out of it as exactly who she had always been. The woman who changed an empire, not because she was asked to, because she chose to, and that choice made in grief and sustained through fear, and finally delivered into the light where everyone could see it clearly, was the most powerful thing that had ever walked through the doors of the Valenti estate. It always had been. It always would be.